They said respect couldn't be earned by a man who'd been property. That a badge pinned to a black man's chest was just metal and cloth, powerless to command authority in a world built on white supremacy. That outlaws would laugh, settlers would resist, and other lawmen would refuse to work alongside someone who'd once been enslaved. They said a former slave might enforce the law, but he'd never truly command respect, never inspire fear in the hearts of hardened criminals, never become the kind of lawman whose very name made outlaws surrender without a fight. They were wrong about Bass Reeves. Not just a little wrong. Catastrophically, historically, undeniably wrong. Because over the course of 32 years, this man born into bondage would become the most feared lawman in American history. Not the most feared black lawman. The most feared lawman, period. White outlaws who'd never shown fear to any man would hear his name and go pale. Gangs that terrorized entire territories would scatter at word he was on their trail. Hardened killers with dozens of murders to their names would drop their guns and raise their hands when Bass Reeves stepped into view. And it wasn't because he was the fastest draw, though he was deadly accurate. It wasn't because he was the biggest or strongest, though at over 6 feet tall, he was physically imposing. It was something deeper, something that transcended physical prowess or tactical skill. It was the quiet, absolute certainty that Bass Reeves would never stop. That running was pointless, that hiding was temporary, that eventually, inevitably, he would find you. And when he did, your choices were simple. Surrender or die. Most chose surrender. Imagine being a criminal in 1880s Indian Territory. You've just robbed a bank or murdered a man or stolen horses. You flee into the wilderness, putting hundreds of miles between yourself and civilization. You cross rivers, climb mountains, hide in caves. You use every trick you know to cover your trail. You feel safe. Then word reaches you. Bass Reeves is coming. Not might be coming, is coming. And suddenly, that vast wilderness doesn't feel so vast anymore. Those hundreds of miles don't feel like enough distance. Those caves and rivers and mountains don't feel like protection. They feel like a delaying tactic at best. Because everyone knows the stories. Everyone has heard what happens when Bass Reeves gets on your trail. He doesn't give up. Ever. You can run for weeks. He'll track you for months. You can hide in the most remote corner of the territory. He'll find you. You can disguise yourself, change your name, try to blend in with settlers or tribal communities. He'll see through it. He speaks their languages, knows their customs, can spot a lie from 100 yards away. And the thing that terrifies criminals most? Bass Reeves doesn't just chase you. He gets inside your head. He understands how you think, where you'll run, who you'll turn to for help. He anticipates your moves before you make them. It's like being hunted by someone who can read your thoughts. Some outlaws went mad from the pressure. They'd wake up sweating, certain they'd heard hoofbeats outside their hideout. They'd jump at shadows, convinced every stranger was Bass Reeves in disguise. Because that's another thing he did. He used disguises. You might think you're safe talking to an old farmer, a cowboy, a freed slave looking for work. Then he'd drop the act, and you'd realize. Too late. Always too late. By the 1880s and 1890s, Bass Reeves had become something more than a lawman. He'd become a force of nature, an inevitability, the human embodiment of the concept that crime doesn't pay. Other deputy marshals might be avoided. Other lawmen might be outrun or outsmarted or killed. But Bass Reeves, he was different. And this terrified people. Not just criminals. Everyone. White settlers in Indian Territory didn't know what to make of him. Here was a black man with more authority than most white men would ever have. A black man who could arrest white people, who could track them down anywhere, who commanded respect from federal judges and fellow marshals. It challenged everything they believed about racial hierarchy. Some welcomed him. They'd been victimized by criminals, and they didn't care what color their rescuer was. They just wanted safety. And Bass Reeves delivered that. But others resented him deeply. They'd call him names, refuse him service, try to humiliate him in public. They'd complain to Judge Parker, demanding that a white deputy be sent instead. They'd spread rumors about him, trying to undermine his authority or get him removed from his position. Bass Reeves ignored it all. He had a job to do. This is what made him truly remarkable. He could have let the racism break him, could have responded with anger or bitterness, could have used his badge to settle personal scores or prove a point. Many men would have. The temptation must have been enormous. To finally have power after years of powerlessness. To finally have authority after being treated as property. But Bass Reeves never abused that power. Not once in 32 years. Not a single documented case of him using excessive force against someone who'd wronged him. Not one arrest that seemed motivated by personal vendetta. Not one complaint that he'd overstepped his authority. Think about what that took. What level of self-control? What strength of character? Every day, he faced people who thought he was inferior because of his skin color. People who'd spit when he walked by. People who'd refuse to shake his hand. People who'd make it clear they thought a black man enforcing the law was an abomination. And every day, he proved them wrong. Not with words, with actions. He tracked criminals they said were impossible to find. He survived situations they said would kill him. He maintained his integrity in an environment designed to corrupt. He showed respect even to people who showed him none. He enforced the law fairly, even when it would have been easy to look the other way. The criminals who underestimated him learned fast. The outlaws who thought a black deputy would be easy to kill or bribe discovered otherwise. Usually at the end of Bass Reeves's rifle, or in the Fort Smith jail awaiting trial. Word spread through the criminal underworld. If you commit a crime in Indian territory, pray it's not Bass Reeves they send after you. Hope for any other deputy, any other marshal, anyone but him. Because Bass Reeves doesn't quit. Bass Reeves doesn't make mistakes. Bass Reeves doesn't accept bribes. Bass Reeves doesn't look the other way. Bass Reeves will find you no matter where you run or how long you hide. And when he finds you, you'll wish you'd never committed that crime. This reputation, this fear, this respect, it wasn't given to him. He had to earn every bit of it. And he earned it the hardest way possible. As a black man in a white supremacist society. As a former slave in a nation still grappling with the aftermath of the Civil War. As someone who, according to the laws of his birth state, wasn't even supposed to be fully human, let alone an agent of federal authority. But earn it he did, arrest by arrest, case by case, mile by mile across the most dangerous territory in America. Until even the most racist critics had to admit, grudgingly, that Bass Reeves was the best at what he did. Not the best black deputy marshal, the best deputy marshal. And that distinction matters, because it meant he'd transcended the limitations others tried to place on him. He'd become undeniable, unignorable, impossible to dismiss or minimize. So when they said a former slave couldn't command respect, Bass Reeves didn't argue. He just went to work. And over the course of 3 decades, he built a legend that would outlast all his doubters. Let's talk about what that actually meant, what it took, what he faced, what he accomplished. Because the broad strokes of his story, amazing as they are, don't capture the full scope of what Bass Reeves achieved. We know he made over 3,000 arrests, but what does that number really represent? It represents 3,000 individual manhunts. 3,000 times Bass Reeves tracked someone across territory that would kill most men. 3,000 confrontations where he had to decide whether to use his weapon or his words, when to press forward and when to be patient, how to bring someone in alive when they'd rather die than face a judge. It represents thousands of miles ridden on horseback through every kind of weather, through blizzards that froze men in their saddles, through heat waves that made water scarce and horses collapse, through floods that turned rivers into death traps, through storms that made visibility impossible. It represents hundreds of nights sleeping on the ground with one eye open, knowing outlaws might try to kill him while he slept. Hundreds of meals eaten cold because a fire would give away his position. Hundreds of times tracking someone through rain that washed away trails or snow that made every step dangerous. Every one of those 3,000 arrests could have been his last. Every manhunt could have ended with Bass Reeves dead in some forgotten corner of Indian Territory. And many times, it nearly did. But he survived. For 32 years. Without being killed. Without being seriously injured. Without losing his integrity or his commitment to the law. That's not luck. That's skill, preparation, intelligence, and an almost superhuman level of competence. So let's dive deeper into the life of the man who proved that respect has nothing to do with the circumstances of your birth and everything to do with the content of your character. The year is 1875. Bass Reeves has just been sworn in as a deputy U.S. Marshal. The badge feels heavy in his hand, not because of its weight, but because of what it represents. For the first time in American history, a former slave is being given federal authority over one of the most dangerous territories in the nation. Judge Isaac Parker hands him the badge personally. Their eyes meet. Parker sees something in Bass that others have missed. Or maybe Parker simply understands that conventional lawmen have failed, and it's time to try something different. Either way, the decision is made. Bass pins that badge to his chest, and from that moment, everything changes. But not immediately. Not obviously. Because the first thing Bass Reeves does after becoming a marshal is something that surprises everyone. He goes home. To his wife Nellie and their growing family. He sits them down and explains what this new job means. The danger. The long absences. The possibility he might not come back from a manhunt. Nellie Reeves knew what she was getting into when she married Bass. She'd seen his determination, his sense of justice, his inability to walk away from something he believed in. But hearing him describe the reality of being a deputy marshal in Indian Territory, that was different. Most deputy marshals in that era were single men, or men whose families lived far from the frontier, because the job was essentially a death sentence. The mortality rate was staggering. Families waited for news that never came. Children grew up without fathers. Wives became widows. Bass Reeves had 11 children eventually. 11. Think about that. 11 children who needed their father. A wife who needed her husband. A farm that needed work. A normal life that beckoned with the promise of safety and stability. He could have said no to Judge Parker. Could have chosen his family over the badge. No one would have blamed him. The fact that he was even asked to be a marshal, given his race and background, was remarkable enough. He'd already proven something just by being considered. But Bass Reeves didn't choose safety. He chose duty. Not because he didn't love his family. The historical record makes clear he adored them. He worked hard to provide for them, spent every moment he could with them, and made sure they knew they mattered more to him than anything else in the world. He chose the badge because he understood something crucial. Indian Territory was chaos. Criminals ran wild. Innocent people, including Native American families trying to live in peace on their own land, were being victimized daily. Someone had to stop it, and Bass Reeves was uniquely qualified to be that someone. So he kissed his wife and children goodbye, packed his gear, checked his weapons, and rode into Indian Territory for the first time as a federal lawman. The outlaws were waiting, not specifically for him. They didn't know yet who Bass Reeves was or what he was capable of. They were just waiting in general. For the next marshal to come riding through, making an easy target of himself, probably dying within a week like so many others. The criminal underworld of Indian Territory had developed a system. When word spread that a new marshal was coming, they'd let him ride in deep. Let him get comfortable. Let him think maybe this wouldn't be so bad. Then they'd hit him. Ambush from the woods. A bullet in the back. A knife in the dark. Whatever worked. It was efficient. It was brutal. And it had worked dozens of times. So when Bass Reeves rode in, they prepared the same welcome. Except Bass Reeves wasn't like the other marshals. He'd lived in this territory for years, during and after the Civil War. He knew these trails. He understood how outlaws thought, where they hid, how they operated, and most importantly, he knew when he was being watched. The first ambush attempt came within days of his arrival. A gang of horse thieves had heard a marshal was in the area. They set up along a narrow trail, perfect for a kill shot. Trees on both sides. No way to escape once you were in the killing zone. They'd used this spot before. It had worked every time. They waited, heard hoofbeats approaching, raised their rifles, and Bass Reeves rode past on a completely different trail, circled around behind them, and had his rifle trained on their backs before they realized what happened. "Drop the weapons," he said quietly, "or I drop you." They dropped the weapons. That became his signature move. Anticipating the ambush, avoiding the trap, turning the tables, making the hunters become the hunted. Over and over again, throughout his career, outlaws would set up perfect ambushes, only to discover Bass Reeves had somehow known about them in advance and avoided them entirely. How did he do it? Multiple factors. First, his time living with Native American tribes had taught him to read the land. He could spot disturbed earth where someone had been waiting, see broken branches that indicated men had positioned themselves in the trees, notice birds that had been startled and flown away, revealing hidden positions. The wilderness spoke to him in ways it didn't speak to others. Second, he had informants everywhere. Remember, Bass spoke multiple native languages. He'd built relationships with Creek, Cherokee, and Seminole communities. He treated them with respect when most white lawmen treated them with contempt. So they talked to him. They told him things. They warned him about ambushes and pointed him toward criminals. Third, he was simply smarter than most outlaws. They thought in straight lines. If a marshal is coming from Fort Smith, he'll take the main trail. Bass Reeves never took the main trail if he could help it. He'd ride parallel to it, staying just out of sight, watching for signs of trouble. Or he'd approach from an unexpected direction entirely, coming in from the north when everyone expected him from the south. The outlaws started to catch on. This new marshal, this Bass Reeves, he wasn't like the others. He was dangerous. Word began to spread through the criminal networks. Be careful, this one's different. But many outlaws didn't believe it. How dangerous could he be? He was black. He'd been a slave. Surely he'd make a mistake eventually. Surely he could be outsmarted, or outfought, or outrun. They learned otherwise. There's a documented case from 1877, just 2 years into Bass's career. A gang of cattle rustlers had been terrorizing ranches throughout the territory. They were good at what they did, professional, organized. They'd stolen hundreds of cattle and disappeared into the wilderness each time without a trace. Several marshals had tried to track them. All had failed. The gang was too careful, their network too extensive. They had scouts watching the trails, safe houses throughout the territory, and enough firepower to win any shootout. Judge Parker sent Bass Reeves. Bass spent 2 weeks just gathering information. He talked to ranchers, listened to their stories about when the rustlers struck and how they operated. He talked to Native Americans who might have seen strangers moving cattle. He studied maps of the territory, looking for patterns. And he found something interesting. The cattle rustlers always struck during the new moon. Always. When the nights were darkest, when visibility was worst, that's when they moved the stolen cattle. Most lawmen would have tried to catch them during the next new moon, set up an ambush at a likely target ranch, wait for the rustlers to show up. It seemed logical. Bass Reeves did the opposite. He tracked where the cattle had been taken, found the trails, even though the rustlers had tried to cover them, followed those trails to their destination, a remote canyon with good grass and water, perfect for hiding stolen cattle until they could be sold. And then he waited. Not for the rustlers to strike again, for them to come back to their hidden canyon to check on the cattle they'd already stolen. It took patience, days of watching, sleeping in short shifts, staying absolutely still and quiet. A lesser man would have gotten impatient, would have assumed he'd guessed wrong, and left. Bass Reeves waited. On the 5th day, 3 riders came to the canyon. They were relaxed, laughing, certain they were safe. They rode right past Bass's hiding spot without noticing him. He could have arrested them then. 3 against 1 weren't terrible odds for a man of his skill. But Bass waited longer, because he wanted the whole gang, not just 3 members. That night, 6 more riders arrived, 9 total. 9 armed men who'd killed at least 2 people during their robberies. 9 criminals who thought they were untouchable. Bass Reeves waited until they were all gathered around their campfire, until they were distracted, passing bottles of whiskey and playing cards, until their guard was down and their weapons weren't immediately at hand. Then he stepped into the firelight, rifle leveled, and said 7 words that would become famous throughout the territory. United States Marshal, you're all under arrest. 9 men, 9 guns, 9 chances for this to go badly. The smart play, the safe play, would have been to shoot first, to come in firing and sort out who survived afterward. That's what most lawmen would have done. Bass Reeves gave them the chance to surrender. For a long moment, nobody moved. The outlaws stared at this lone black marshal who'd somehow found them, somehow gotten the drop on them, and was somehow giving them a choice instead of a bullet. Then the leader of the gang, a man named Jim Webb, started to laugh. You expect 9 of us to surrender to one He didn't finish the sentence, because Bass Reeves had shifted his rifle's aim to Webb's head in a movement so fast it seemed impossible. And Webb saw something in Bass's eyes that made him stop talking. I expect, Bass said quietly, that you'll make the smart choice. Because if you go for those guns, some of you will die. Maybe all of you. Maybe I die too. Or maybe you surrender right now, face a trial, and get to keep breathing. Another long silence. Then Webb raised his hands, slowly, and one by one, the others did the same. Bass Reeves marched all 9 of them out of that canyon. 9 prisoners, a journey of over 100 miles back to Fort Smith. Just him and 9 men who'd happily kill him if they got the chance. He didn't sleep the entire way back. Couldn't risk it. He kept them chained together, moving during the day, stopping only when absolutely necessary. He watched them constantly, his rifle always within reach. He anticipated every possible escape attempt before it could happen, and he delivered all 9 of them to Fort Smith alive. They stood trial, they were convicted, and the legend of Bass Reeves grew, because word of that arrest spread. 9 rustlers, 1 marshal, and he'd done it without firing a shot, without killing anyone, just through preparation, patience, and the absolute certainty in his voice when he gave them the choice. That was the pattern Bass Reeves established early in his career. He could be deadly when necessary, and several outlaws learned that the hard way. But whenever possible, he brought them in alive. He gave them the chance to surrender. He proved that justice didn't require violence if you were smart enough and patient enough and commanding enough. But not every criminal was smart enough to surrender. Not every confrontation ended peacefully. And the times when Bass Reeves had to draw his weapon, those became legendary for different reasons. Let's talk about Bass Reeves and violence, because this is where the legend gets complicated, where the mythology meets reality, where we have to understand both what he was capable of and how he chose to use that capability. Bass Reeves was one of the deadliest shots in the American West, not one of the deadliest black shots. One of the deadliest shots, period. Contemporary accounts describe his marksmanship as almost supernatural. He could shoot a pistol out of a man's hand at 50 yards, could hit a target the size of a silver dollar at distances that made other marksmen shake their heads in disbelief. He practiced constantly. Every day when he was home, he'd spend time shooting. Not randomly, but methodically. Working on accuracy at different distances. Drawing and firing quickly. Shooting from horseback. Shooting in low light. Shooting with his offhand in case his dominant hand was injured. This wasn't sport for him. It was survival. Because in his line of work, being the second best shot meant being dead. There are documented cases of Bass Reeves in gunfights. Not many, because most outlaws surrendered rather than face him. But enough to establish his deadly skill. And what's remarkable about these cases isn't just that he won. It's how he won. The circumstances. The odds he overcame. 1884. Bass is tracking 2 brothers wanted for murder. The Brunter brothers. They've killed 3 people that authorities know about. Probably more. They're violent, unpredictable, and they've sworn they'll never be taken alive. Bass finds their camp in a remote area of the territory. He approaches carefully, using every bit of cover, gets within shouting distance without being detected, which is impressive given how paranoid the Brunters are. "United States Marshal," he calls out. "Tom and Jim Brunter. You're under arrest for murder. Come out with your hands up." The response is immediate. Gunfire. Lots of it. The brothers aren't interested in talking. They're behind cover. They've got rifles. And they figure 2 against 1 gives them good odds. What they don't know is that Bass Reeves has already identified their positions based on muzzle flash, has calculated angles of fire, has found cover that protects him from both positions simultaneously while giving him clear shots at theirs. The gunfight lasts less than 2 minutes. When it's over, both Brunner brothers are dead. Bass Reeves has a bullet hole through his hat and another through his coat, but he's untouched. 2 shots fired, 2 men down, both headshots from over 70 yards in fading light. Some people hear stories like that and think it sounds heroic, like something from a Western movie. But Bass Reeves never talked about it that way. He didn't brag about his shooting, didn't celebrate those kills. He did his job. The Brunters made their choice, and he did what was necessary to survive and uphold the law. Here's what made Bass different from many other lawmen of his era. He understood that every time he pulled his trigger, every time he killed someone, it was a failure. Not a failure of skill. A failure of the system. A failure of society. Because if things had been different, if people had made better choices, if justice and opportunity had been distributed more fairly, maybe those men wouldn't have become killers in the first place. That didn't make him hesitate when he needed to shoot. Couldn't afford to, but it made him thoughtful about violence in a way many lawmen weren't. There's a documented case from 1889 that illustrates this perfectly. Bass tracks an outlaw named Bob Dozier for 3 weeks. Dozier has killed a store clerk during a robbery. He's armed, desperate, and dangerous. Bass finally corners him in a small settlement. Instead of going in guns blazing, Bass does something unexpected. He sends word to Dozier through a local person Dozier trusts. The message is simple. "I will give you 30 minutes to decide. Surrender and face trial, or I come in and we settle this with guns. Your choice." Dozier sends back a message. "Why would I surrender to hang?" Bass's response. "Because if you surrender, you get a trial, a chance to tell your side. Maybe the jury shows mercy. Maybe you get prison instead of hanging. Maybe you find God in prison and turn your life around. But if we shoot it out, one of us dies today for certain. Maybe both of us. I'd rather you lived and faced justice than died right now. So I'm giving you a chance." Dozier thinks about it for 29 minutes. Then he walks out with his hands up. At his trial, Dozier admits to the killing, but explains the clerk had called him a racial slur and reached for a weapon. The jury, surprisingly, shows mercy. Instead of hanging, Dozier gets 20 years. He serves 15, gets released, and by all accounts becomes a law-abiding citizen. That never would have happened if Bass Reeves had just rushed in shooting. But it did happen because Bass understood that sometimes the bravest thing a lawman can do is give a criminal a chance to choose life over death. Not every outlaw was that smart. Not every confrontation ended with a peaceful surrender, and Bass Reeves accumulated his share of kills over 32 years. 14 confirmed deaths at his hands, possibly more that weren't documented. 14 doesn't sound like a lot compared to the mythology of Wild West gunfighters. But here's the thing about those 14. Every single one was ruled justified. Every single one happened in the line of duty. Every single one involved a criminal who'd been given the chance to surrender and chose violence instead. Compare that to other famous lawmen of the era. Wyatt Earp, Wild Bill Hickok, Pat Garrett. Men who are remembered as heroes but who had questionable kills on their records. Shootings that might have been avoided. Deaths that served personal vendettas more than justice. Bass Reeves? Clean record. Every kill documented and justified. Every death investigated and cleared. For 32 years, he used lethal force only when absolutely necessary, and never once crossed the line into murder or excessive force. That's extraordinary, especially given what he faced. 1891. Bass is serving a warrant on a man named Willie Leach. Leach is wanted for assault, not murder, not a capital crime, just assault. But Leach doesn't want to go to jail. When Bass arrives at his cabin, Leach is waiting with a shotgun. Bass could shoot him, has legal authority to do so. The man is armed and threatening a federal officer. Any jury in the territory would clear Bass in a heartbeat, but it's not a capital crime, and Bass doesn't want to kill a man for refusing arrest on an assault charge if he can avoid it. So he does something that sounds insane, but somehow works. He talks. For 3 hours. Standing outside that cabin, exposed, knowing Leach could shoot him at any moment. Just talking. He talks about Leach's family, his mother who's still alive and would grieve if he died, his children who need a father, even a father in prison. He talks about the law and why it matters, about justice and fairness and how running just makes things worse. And slowly, gradually, Leach lowers the shotgun, comes out, surrenders. The assault charge gets Leach 6 months in jail. He serves his time and goes back to his family. Years later, after Bass retires, Leach seeks him out, just to thank him, to say that Bass saved his life that day by being patient instead of violent. This is the Bass Reeves the mythology often misses. Yes, he was deadly when necessary. Yes, he could win any gunfight, but he was equally skilled at avoiding gunfights, at talking people down, at giving criminals a way out that didn't involve bullets. And this is where the respect came from, not just from being the fastest or the best shot, but from being fair, from treating even criminals with a degree of dignity, from understanding that justice should be the goal, not vengeance, from being someone who could kill you, but would rather not if there was any other option. The outlaws knew this about him, and it created a strange dynamic. They feared him because he was so effective, but they also, in a twisted way, respected him because he kept his word. If he said he'd bring you in alive if you surrendered, he meant it. If he said you'd get a fair trial, you would. He didn't lie, didn't make promises he couldn't keep. Compare that to other lawmen of the era who'd promise mercy, then shoot you in the back, who'd lie to get you to surrender, then beat you senseless, who'd take bribes to look the other way, or falsify evidence to secure convictions. Bass Reeves did none of that. Ever. His word was absolute. And over time, even criminals began to trust that. There's a fascinating case from 1895. A gang of counterfeiters operating in the territory. 5 men printing fake money and flooding the area with it. They're good at what they do. The counterfeits are high quality, and the gang is well armed and organized. Several marshals try to catch them. All fail. The counterfeiters are too smart, too careful. They move frequently, never stay in one place long, and have escape routes planned for every hideout. Bass Reeves gets assigned the case. He tracks them for 6 weeks, gets close several times, but they always slip away. It's frustrating. These aren't violent criminals. They haven't killed anyone, but they're undermining the economy, and they need to be stopped. Finally, Bass does something unconventional. He sends a message to the gang through an intermediary. I know where you are. I can come in shooting, and some of you will probably die. Or you can surrender and face trial for counterfeiting. No one has to die. Your choice. The gang discusses it. They know Bass Reeves' reputation. Know he keeps his word. Know that counterfeiting isn't a hanging offense, just prison time. And they know that if they try to shoot it out with him, the odds aren't in their favor. They surrender, all 5 of them, walk out and hand themselves over without resistance. At trial, the ringleader is asked why they surrendered. His answer becomes famous throughout the territory. Because Bass Reeves gave us his word we'd get a fair trial, and Bass Reeves has never broken his word. They all go to prison, serve their sentences, and the counterfeiting operation is shut down without a single shot fired. This becomes Bass's signature approach over the years. Violence when necessary, patience when possible, always giving criminals a choice, always keeping his word, always treating people, even criminals, with a baseline level of respect and fairness. But make no mistake, when violence was necessary, Bass Reeves was absolutely ruthless. 1896. A gang of outlaws ambushes Bass on a remote trail. 7 men. They've been planning this for weeks. They know Bass's reputation, but they figure 7 against 1 gives them the advantage. They're wrong. The ambush happens at dawn. Bass is riding through a narrow canyon when gunfire erupts from both sides. He takes a bullet through his left shoulder immediately. His horse is shot out from under him. Most men would have died right there, caught in a kill zone, wounded, without cover. But Bass Reeves isn't most men. He rolls behind his fallen horse for cover, draws both pistols, and in the next 90 seconds, he puts on a display of marksmanship that witnesses would talk about for the rest of their lives. 7 outlaws firing from elevated positions, Bass wounded and behind minimal cover, and he methodically takes them all down. 2 dead, 5 wounded so badly they can't continue fighting. 7 shots fired from each pistol. 14 shots total, 14 hits. When it's over, Bass stands up. His left arm is useless from the shoulder wound. His horse is dead. He's bleeding heavily, and he calmly disarms the wounded outlaws, ties them up, and walks them out of that canyon on foot. Delivers all 5 survivors to the nearest settlement where he can get medical attention and secure transport back to Fort Smith. The doctor who treats him later said Bass walked 12 miles with that shoulder wound before seeking help. 12 miles, while guarding 5 prisoners, while bleeding. Didn't it hurt? The doctor asked. Bass's response, hurting doesn't change what needs to be done. That ambush attempt becomes the last serious effort to kill Bass Reeves through overwhelming force, because word spreads through the criminal underworld. 7 men tried. 7 men lost. The lesson is clear. You cannot kill Bass Reeves by outnumbering him. You cannot kill him by ambush. You cannot kill him at all. And that's when the fear truly takes hold. When outlaws start to understand, they're not dealing with a normal lawman. They're dealing with something beyond that. A force of nature in human form. Someone who will not stop, cannot be killed, and will eventually catch you no matter what you do. Some criminals respond by leaving the territory entirely. Just pack up and go somewhere else. Anywhere else. Because if Bass Reeves is hunting you in Indian territory, you're already caught. It's just a matter of time. Others try to negotiate before he even arrives. They hear through the grapevine that Bass has a warrant for them, and they surrender to local authorities, or even travel to Fort Smith voluntarily. Better to turn yourself in than have Bass Reeves come hunting you. And a few, the hardcore criminals who can't accept reality, try to run. They flee deep into the wilderness. They hide in places they think no one can find them. They take every precaution. And Bass Reeves finds them anyway. Every single time. Let's talk about how Bass Reeves actually found people. Because the mythology makes it sound almost magical. He'd get a warrant and somehow, impossibly, track someone across hundreds of miles of wilderness and bring them in. But there was nothing magical about it. It was skill. Pure, refined, relentless skill built through years of practice and observation. Bass Reeves could track a man across terrain that would stump the best hunters in the territory, through rivers that should have washed away all traces, over rock that showed no footprints, in snow that had been blown over by wind, in rain that had turned the ground to mud. He didn't just follow obvious trails. He read the landscape like a book. A broken twig here, disturbed leaves there, the way grass bent in a certain direction, the freshness of horse droppings, the depth of a footprint and what it revealed about the person's weight and urgency. There's a case from 1887 that demonstrates this perfectly. A man named Frank Butler murders a rancher and steals his horses. He flees into the deepest wilderness of Indian Territory during a rainstorm that lasts 3 days. The rain washes away tracks, turns creeks into rivers, makes the ground soft and indistinct. Every other marshal says it's hopeless. You can't track someone in these conditions. Butler has too much of a head start, and nature has erased all evidence of his passage. Bass Reeves takes the case anyway. He starts at the murder scene, studies it carefully, notices small things. The direction Butler's horse was facing when he mounted it. The depth of the hoof prints, which tells Bass the horse was carrying extra weight from the stolen goods. The fact that Butler left in such a hurry he didn't secure one of the saddlebags properly. From these details, Bass builds a profile. Butler is heading east, toward Arkansas. He's weighted down, which means he can't move as fast as he'd like. And he's careless, which means he'll make mistakes. The rain has erased the obvious trail, but Bass doesn't need the obvious trail. He knows where a man on horseback, carrying heavy goods, in a hurry, would go. There are only so many paths through this terrain that make sense. Only so many river crossings that are safe. Only so many places to find shelter from the storm. Bass checks them systematically. At each location, he finds tiny signs. A horseshoe mark on a rock near a river crossing. A piece of fabric caught on a branch. A place where someone camped. The ash is old, but not too old. He tracks Butler for 8 days. Through rain. Through cold. Through terrain that would break most men. And on the 8th day, he rides into a small settlement, just as Frank Butler is trying to sell one of the stolen horses. Butler sees him and runs. Bass chases him on foot through the settlement. Butler ducks into a building, thinking he can hide or escape out the back. But Bass has already circled around. When Butler comes out the back door, Bass is waiting. "Frank Butler," Bass says calmly, "you're under arrest for murder and horse theft." Butler stares at him in disbelief. "How? How did you find me?" Bass's answer becomes legendary. "Because you left a trail. You just didn't know how to read it." That becomes one of Bass's famous sayings. Everyone leaves a trail. You just need to know how to read it. And Bass could read trails that seemed impossible. He could track a man who deliberately tried to cover his path, who'd walked backward in his own footprints, who'd worn different boots to confuse pursuers, who'd ridden his horse in circles before heading in his true direction. None of it worked against Bass Reeves. Why? Because he understood something fundamental. You can hide your destination. You can obscure your tracks, but you can't hide your patterns. Every person has patterns. The way they think, the places they feel safe, the people they trust. Bass studied these patterns. When he got a warrant for someone, he didn't just learn their name and crime. He learned everything about them, where they grew up, who their family was, what their habits were, what they liked and disliked, who their friends were. Then he'd think like them. If I were this person, where would I go? Who would I turn to for help? What would I do when I got desperate? And time after time, he'd be right. There's a documented case of Bass tracking a man named Jim Webb. Not the Jim Webb from the Rustler gang. Different person. This Jim Webb murdered a store clerk in 1890 and fled. He was smart about it. He didn't run to family or friends. Didn't head for any obvious destination. He went deep into the wilderness and stayed there. Bass got the warrant 6 weeks after the murder. Cold trail. Very cold. Most marshals would have said it was hopeless. Bass studied Webb's background. Learned that Webb had been a trapper before turning to crime. That meant he knew how to survive in the wilderness. Knew how to hunt and find water and build shelter. But it also meant something else. Trappers have territories. Areas they know intimately. Places where they've set trap lines and found good hunting. Even when running, a trapper would gravitate toward familiar territory. Bass studied maps. Found the area where Webb had trapped before the murder. It was 60 miles from where the crime occurred. But Bass bet Webb had returned there. He rode to that territory. Started checking the areas a trapper would use. Remote camps. Natural shelters. Places near water with good sight lines. And on the 3rd day, he found signs. Old campfire. Recent. Someone staying there who knew the land. Bass didn't rush in. He watched. Waited. And sure enough, Jim Webb returned to the camp that evening with game he'd killed. "Jim Webb!" Bass called from the tree line. "United States Marshal! You're under arrest!" Webb dropped the dead rabbit he was carrying. Stared into the darkness where Bass's voice had come from. "How?" Webb asked. The same question Frank Butler had asked. The same question dozens of outlaws would ask. How did you find me? Because I knew where you'd go, Bass said, before you knew it yourself. This ability to think like the criminals he hunted, to predict their moves, to understand their psychology, this is what made Bass Reeves truly exceptional. And then there were the disguises. Oh, the disguises. Bass Reeves was a master of disguise. He could transform himself completely, become a different person, infiltrate outlaw gangs, gather information, get close to wanted men without them suspecting who he really was. Remember, this was a 6-foot-tall black man in the Old West. He should have been recognizable anywhere. His appearance should have made disguise impossible. But somehow, Bass made it work. He'd dress as a cowboy and ride into an outlaw camp looking for work. He'd pose as a farmer seeking to buy land. He'd pretend to be a freed slave looking for relatives. He'd become a gambler, a drunk, a preacher, a beggar. And criminals who knew what Bass Reeves looked like, who'd seen wanted posters with his description, who'd been warned he might come after them. They'd talk to him, trust him, never suspect they were chatting with the very marshal hunting them. 1892. A gang of bank robbers is hiding in a settlement under assumed names. They've been there for months, living quietly, drawing no attention, waiting for the heat to die down so they can leave the territory. Bass gets a tip about their location, but no confirmation of their identities. He can't just ride in and arrest random people. He needs proof, needs to identify which men in this settlement are actually the robbers. So he disguises himself as an old, half-blind farmer, rides into town on a mule, acts confused and helpless, asks people for directions, tells a story about losing his land and looking for his son who might be in the area. The robbers, thinking he's harmless, help him, give him food, let him stay in their barn. And while he's there, Bass observes, listens, learns their real identities, confirms they're the wanted men. Then one night, the old farmer vanishes, and Bass Reeves, fully armed and carrying proper warrants with the gang members' real names, returns with backup. They arrest the entire gang without resistance, because by the time the robbers realize what happened, they're already in chains. One of the robbers later tells a reporter, "We fed him, we sheltered him, we felt sorry for him, and all along, it was Bass Reeves. I'll never trust anyone again." But Bass's most famous disguise story happens in 1889. There's an outlaw named Bob Dozier. Wait, different Bob Dozier from the earlier story. Common name in those days. This Bob Dozier is wanted for murder and robbery. He's hiding with his gang in a remote cabin. The gang knows Bass Reeves is looking for them. They've posted guards. They're paranoid. Anyone who approaches the cabin is challenged at gunpoint. Bass knows where they are, but can't get close. Any frontal approach would result in a gunfight, and several gang members would likely escape in the chaos. So he disguises himself as a homeless drifter, tears his clothes, rubs dirt on his face, messes up his hair, makes himself look desperate and harmless. Then he stumbles toward the cabin, calling out weakly for help. The guards see him, see what looks like a starving man who can barely walk. They laugh at him, but let him approach. "Please," Bass begs in a voice nothing like his normal deep tone. "I haven't eaten in days. Just some water. Anything." The outlaws mock him, but they're not entirely heartless. They give him a piece of bread, tell him to eat it, and move on. Bass eats slowly, studies the cabin layout, counts the men, identifies which one is Bob Dozier, notes where the weapons are stored. Then he stumbles away, still playing the helpless beggar. He returns that night with backup, positions men around the cabin, and just before dawn, when the gang is still sleeping, Bass kicks in the door and announces, "United States Marshal! Nobody move!" The gang wakes up to find themselves surrounded. They're confused, disoriented. How did the marshals find them? How did they get so close without the guards noticing? Then Bob Dozier sees Bass's face, really sees it, and realizes, You were the beggar." Bass nods. I was, and now you're under arrest. The entire gang surrenders without a fight. Because what's the point? If Bass Reeves can walk right into your hideout disguised as a beggar, study your operation, and return with overwhelming force, you're outmatched in every possible way. Word of these disguises spreads throughout the criminal underworld, and it adds another layer of fear to Bass Reeves' reputation. Because now, outlaws can't trust anyone. That helpful stranger might be Bass Reeves. That old man asking for directions might be Bass Reeves. That drunk in the saloon might be Bass Reeves. Paranoia sets in. Criminals start suspecting everyone, fighting among themselves, turning on each other, all because they know Bass Reeves could be anyone, could be anywhere, could be watching them right now. Some outlaws respond by becoming hermits, hiding in the deepest wilderness, avoiding all human contact, but that just makes them easier targets for a tracker as skilled as Bass. Others try to leave the territory entirely. They flee to Texas, or Kansas, or Colorado. And sometimes they succeed. Sometimes they get away. But sometimes Bass Reeves follows them, because his jurisdiction technically extended beyond Indian territory in pursuit of fugitives. And Bass would track a man across state lines if necessary, would coordinate with other law enforcement agencies, would never give up until the warrant was served. There's a case from 1894. A killer named Tom Story flees Indian territory and makes it all the way to Texas. Thinks he's safe, settles in a small town under a false name, gets a job, starts building a new life. 2 years pass. Tom Story relaxes, figures he got away with it. The law has forgotten him. He's safe. Then one day, Bass Reeves rides into town, walks straight to the shop where Tom Story works, and says, "Tom Story, I have a warrant for your arrest. It's 2 years old, but it's still valid. You're coming back to Fort Smith." Story is stunned. "How? How did you find me after 2 years?" Bass's answer, "I never stopped looking." And that becomes another element of the legend. Bass Reeves doesn't give up, doesn't forget, doesn't let cases go cold. He might have newer warrants to serve, more urgent cases to pursue, but he keeps files on everyone, keeps gathering information, keeps tracking even when the trail seems dead. And eventually, months or years later, he'll get a tip, a piece of information, a sighting, and he'll pick up the trail again like no time has passed at all. This relentlessness, this absolute refusal to quit. This becomes the core of Bass Reeves' reputation. You can run from him, but you can't hide forever. You can delay the inevitable, but you can't escape it. The criminals in Indian territory start to understand something that should terrify them. Bass Reeves isn't just a lawman. He's a hunter. And once he starts hunting you, you're prey. You can try to evade, can use every survival trick you know, can hide in places you think no one can find. But he will find you. Maybe not today. Maybe not this month. But someday, you'll hear hoofbeats outside. Or you'll see a figure in the distance. Or someone will call your name. And it will be Bass Reeves. And your running will be over. Now let's talk about something the mythology often glosses over. Bass Reeves' relationship with the Native American nations whose land he policed. Because this is complicated, nuanced, and absolutely crucial to understanding both his success and his character. Remember, Indian territory wasn't called that as a courtesy. It was literally land that had been designated for Native American tribes, the Cherokee, Creek, Seminole, Chickasaw, and Choctaw nations. These were sovereign peoples with their own governments, their own laws, their own ways of life. And then the U.S. government decided to enforce federal law there, to send marshals into these nations' territories without asking permission, to arrest people, including tribal members, and drag them to Fort Smith for trial in a system that often didn't understand or respect native customs and sovereignty. It was, to put it mildly, a tense situation. Most white marshals treated Native Americans with suspicion at best, contempt at worst. They'd ride into tribal communities like conquerors, make demands, show no respect for tribal authority, take what they needed without asking. and wonder why the Native Americans didn't help them catch criminals. Bass Reeves was different. He'd lived among the Creek and Seminole during the Civil War, had learned their languages, their customs, their values. He understood that these weren't primitive people who needed white civilization. They were sophisticated societies with rich cultures, complex political systems, and their own sense of justice. And he treated them accordingly. When Bass rode into a Native community, he didn't demand. He asked. He showed respect to tribal leaders. He followed their customs. If they had rules about how visitors should behave, he followed those rules. If they had protocols for seeking help, he observed those protocols. More importantly, he listened. Many crimes in Indian Territory affected Native Americans directly. White outlaws stealing from Native families, squatters illegally settling on tribal land, traders cheating Native Americans in business deals, violence against Native women that other marshals ignored. Bass Reeves pursued these cases with the same intensity he brought to any other warrant. He didn't see Native victims as less important, didn't let white criminals slide because their victims were Native. He enforced the law equally. And the tribal communities noticed. There are documented cases of Native leaders specifically requesting Bass Reeves when they had a problem. Not just any marshal, Bass Reeves. Because they knew he'd take them seriously. Knew he'd actually investigate. Knew he wouldn't assume the Native person was lying or exaggerating. 1893. A white trader named Samuel Morton has been cheating Creek families for years, selling them spoiled food at inflated prices, using rigged scales to shortchange them. When they complain, he threatens them. Says no white lawman will believe a Creek over a white businessman. The Creek Nation brings the complaint to Judge Parker. Several marshals have been sent to investigate. All of them came back saying there was no evidence. All of them, coincidentally, had been given free supplies by Samuel Morton. Judge Parker sends Bass Reeves. Bass arrives at the Creek settlement and does something radical. He asks the Creek families to show him what happened, takes them seriously as witnesses, documents their complaints carefully. Then he goes to Morton's trading post, pretends to be a customer, watches how Morton operates, and sure enough, Morton tries the same tricks on him. Rigged scales, spoiled goods disguised as fresh, inflated prices. Bass buys several items. Then he arrests Morton for fraud and theft. Morton is outraged. These are just Indians. You can't arrest a white man for business disputes with Indians. Bass's response is calm and devastating. I can arrest any man who breaks federal law, and fraud is fraud, regardless of who the victims are. Morton goes to trial. The Creek witnesses testify, and because Bass Reeves investigated properly, documented everything, treated the Native Americans as credible witnesses, Morton is convicted and sentenced to 2 years in prison. Word of this spreads through the Creek Nation and through the other tribal nations. Bass Reeves, they learn, actually enforces the law fairly, actually protects Native Americans, actually treats them with respect. This creates something remarkable, a network of informants and allies throughout Indian Territory. When Bass needs information, Native communities help him. When he's tracking someone, they point him in the right direction. When he needs supplies or shelter, they provide it. This isn't just because he's fair, it's because he's useful to them. The tribal nations have their own problems with criminals, outlaws who hide on their land, white squatters who refuse to leave, violent men who prey on isolated Native families. Bass Reeves helps solve these problems, and in return, the tribes help him do his job. It's a relationship built on mutual respect and mutual benefit, not charity, not condescension. Just two parties working together because it serves both their interests. Compare this to other marshals who make enemies of the tribal nations, who can't get information because no one will talk to them, who can't track criminals effectively because they don't understand the land or the people. Bass Reeves has a massive advantage because he invested the time to build relationships, to learn languages, to show respect, to actually care about justice for everyone, not just white victims. But this comes with costs, real, painful costs that the mythology often ignores. Let's talk about what it actually meant to be Bass Reeves. Day to day, year after year, for 3 decades. It meant being away from home for months at a time, chasing warrants across hundreds of miles, sleeping on the ground, eating whatever you could hunt or catch, missing birthdays and holidays, and your children growing up. Bass had 11 children. Think about that. 11 children who needed their father. And he was gone more often than he was home. Out in the territory, tracking criminals, risking his life. His wife Nellie raised those children mostly alone, fed them, clothed them, taught them, comforted them when they missed their father, worried constantly that Bass wouldn't come home from his next manhunt. And Bass knew this, carried the guilt of it. But he also believed the work mattered, that bringing order to Indian territory, protecting innocent people from criminals, was worth the sacrifice. Easy to say, harder to live with. There's a documented moment from 1897. Bass returns home after a 4-month manhunt. His youngest daughter doesn't recognize him at first. She's shy around this tall stranger. It takes hours before she warms up to him. That night, Nellie finds Bass sitting alone outside, head in his hands. She asks what's wrong. "My own daughter didn't know me," he says. "I've been gone so long she forgot her father's face." Nellie puts her hand on his shoulder. "She'll remember. You're home now." "For how long?" Bass asks. "A week? 2? Then I'm gone again, chasing someone else who broke the law somewhere else." "You could quit," Nellie says. "Find other work. Stay home." Bass is silent for a long time. Then, "If I quit, who replaces me? Another marshal who doesn't care about justice for everyone? Who takes bribes? Who shoots first and asks questions later? How many people suffer because I chose comfort over duty?" Nellie knows he won't quit, knows the badge means too much to him, knows he sees it as more than a job. It's a calling, a responsibility, a chance to prove that a former slave can uphold the law as well as any man. But knowing that doesn't make it easier, for her or for him. And then there's the racism. The constant, grinding, exhausting racism that Bass faced every single day. Because let's be clear, being an exceptional lawman didn't make white people respect him as an equal. It made them grudgingly acknowledge his skill while still treating him as inferior in every other context. Bass could arrest a white man, could track him across 100 miles, could testify against him in court and see him convicted, and then that same man's family and friends would refuse to serve Bass in their restaurant, would make him wait outside instead of entering their business, would call him slurs to his face. He couldn't stay in most hotels, couldn't eat in most restaurants. When he came to white settlements, people would make it clear he wasn't welcome except in his capacity as a lawman. And even then, barely. There are documented cases of Bass being refused service even while wearing his badge, of white business owners telling him to his face that they don't serve colored people, marshal or not. And Bass couldn't respond with anger, couldn't let it show how much it hurt, because any display of emotion, any pushback, would be used against him, would be cited as proof that black men couldn't be trusted with authority. So he swallowed it, day after day, year after year. The humiliations, the insults, the casual cruelty of a society that valued his service but not his humanity. He had to be better than perfect, because perfect wasn't enough. Any mistake he made would reflect on all black people. Any loss of temper would confirm racist stereotypes. Any failure would be used as justification for why black men shouldn't be lawmen. The pressure must have been incredible, and there were times when that pressure nearly broke him. Times when the injustice of it all, the constant need to prove himself, the loneliness of being exceptional in a world that hated you for it, almost became too much. 1898, Bass is in Fort Smith between assignments. He's tired, physically and emotionally exhausted. He goes to a saloon, just wanting a drink and a moment of peace. The bartender refuses to serve him. "We don't serve your kind here." Bass shows his badge. I'm a U.S. Marshal. Don't care. You're still colored. Get out. Other patrons laugh, make jokes. One man says, maybe out in Indian territory, the Indians let you pretend you're equal. But here in civilization, we know better. Bass Reeves stands there. For a long moment, he doesn't move. Just stands there, with his badge visible, surrounded by men who are mocking him, being denied service in a town where he's helped maintain law and order for over 20 years. He could arrest them, has legal authority to do so. They're violating his civil rights. He could make a scene, could demand respect, could use his badge to force compliance. Instead, he turns and walks out. Not because he's weak, not because he's afraid, but because he knows that fighting this particular battle, in this particular way, accomplishes nothing. It just reinforces their prejudices, gives them ammunition to complain about uppity black lawmen who abuse their authority. So he takes the high road. Again, like he's had to do thousands of times before. Like he'll have to do thousands of times again. Later, a fellow marshal finds him sitting alone outside, asks if he's okay. Do you know what it's like, Bass says quietly, to spend 23 years proving you're as good as anyone else, and still have people treat you like you're nothing? The other marshal, a white man named John Williams, doesn't have an answer. Because what can you say to that? What comfort can you offer? Eventually, Williams just sits beside him in silence, a small gesture of solidarity. It doesn't fix anything, but it reminds Bass he's not entirely alone. These moments of doubt, of exhaustion, of wondering if it's all worth it, they're part of Bass Reeves' story too. The mythology makes him seem invincible, but he was human. He felt pain. He struggled. What made him remarkable wasn't that he didn't feel these things. It's that he kept going anyway. He kept serving warrants, kept tracking criminals, kept maintaining his integrity, even when the system was rigged against him, kept being excellent, even when excellence wasn't enough to earn basic human dignity. And slowly, gradually, his persistence started to change things. Not everywhere, not completely, but in small ways. The other deputy marshals, most of them white, began to respect him, really respect him, not just as a skilled colleague, but as a man. Judges who initially doubted him learned to trust his testimony completely, knew that if Bass Reeves said something happened, it happened exactly that way. No exaggeration, no prejudice, just facts. Even some criminals, after Bass arrested them, came to respect him. There are documented cases of outlaws who, after serving their sentences, sought Bass out just to shake his hand, to thank him for treating them fairly when other lawmen would have beaten or killed them. Bass Reeves was changing perceptions, slowly, one person at a time, proving through relentless excellence that the color of a man's skin said nothing about his character or capabilities. But that progress came at enormous personal cost. The loneliness of being a pioneer, of bearing the weight of representing your entire race with every action, of knowing that your failures would be used to justify denying opportunities to others. Most people couldn't have carried that burden, would have broken under it, would have given up or given in or let the bitterness consume them. Bass Reeves carried it for 32 years, and somehow, impossibly, maintained his integrity throughout. Let's talk about some of Bass Reeves' most legendary manhunts, the cases that built his reputation, the pursuits that seemed impossible until he accomplished them. Because understanding these specific cases helps us understand what made him truly exceptional. Winter of 1881, one of the harshest winters Indian Territory had seen in decades. Snow measured in feet, not inches. Temperatures that killed livestock and froze rivers solid. Most marshals stayed in Fort Smith, waiting for spring. Too dangerous to ride out in these conditions. But there was a warrant out for two brothers named Ned and John Christie. They'd murdered a family during a robbery. 4 people dead, including 2 children. And they'd fled into the wilderness, thinking winter would protect them. That no lawman would be crazy enough to track them in this weather. They were wrong. Bass Reeves volunteered for the assignment. Judge Parker asked him 3 times if he was sure. The conditions were brutal. The brothers were known to be ruthless, and tracking them through snow and ice added layers of danger that would kill most men. Bass said he was sure, because those murdered children deserved justice. Because letting the brothers think they could hide behind Winter set a bad precedent. Because someone had to do it. He set out in late January. The temperature was below zero. The snow was waist-deep in places. His horse struggled through drifts that seemed endless. And somewhere ahead, maybe 50 miles away, maybe 100, the Christie brothers were hiding. Bass tracked them for 6 weeks. 6 weeks in conditions that would kill a normal man. He nearly froze to death twice. Lost his first horse when it broke through ice crossing a frozen stream. Ran out of food and had to hunt in a blizzard just to survive. But he kept going. Because he'd taken an oath. Because he never quit. Because those murdered children haunted him. He found the Christie brothers holed up in a remote cabin, half-starved and desperate. They'd thought winter would save them. Instead, it had just delayed the inevitable. When Bass kicked in that cabin door, frozen solid and covered in ice, looking more like a snow demon than a man, the brothers didn't even try to fight. They just stared at him in disbelief. "How?" Ned Christie asked. "How did you survive out there?" Bass, frostbitten and exhausted, gave a simple answer. "I had a reason to." He brought both brothers back to Fort Smith. The journey took another 3 weeks. 3 weeks of keeping prisoners secure while battling the same brutal winter conditions. But he made it. Delivered them to Judge Parker alive for trial. They were convicted and hanged for the murders. And the story of Bass Reeves tracking men through the worst winter in memory became legendary throughout the territory. But that wasn't even his longest pursuit. 1888. A gang leader named Greenleaf ambushes and kills a deputy marshal. Then he vanishes into Indian territory. The other marshals want revenge, want to ride out immediately and hunt Greenleaf down. Judge Parker says no. He wants Greenleaf brought in alive for trial. Wants it done right, and he assigns the case to Bass Reeves. Bass starts tracking, follows Greenleaf's trail west, then north, then east. The outlaw is moving constantly, never staying in one place long, always keeping ahead of pursuit. Days turn into weeks, weeks turn into months. Bass sends updates to Judge Parker. Still tracking, haven't lost the trail. But as time passes, other marshals start suggesting he give up. Greenleaf is too smart, too careful. The trail is too cold. Bass refuses. He's invested too much time. Learned too much about how Greenleaf thinks. He can feel himself getting closer. 4 months into the pursuit, Bass is tracking through Creek territory. He's talking to everyone he meets, asking about strangers, building a picture of Greenleaf's movements. And then he gets a break. A Creek family mentions a white man who passed through 2 weeks ago, heading south. Seemed nervous, kept looking over his shoulder. Bass follows the lead, picks up the trail again, and 3 days later, he catches up to Greenleaf at a small settlement near the Texas border. Greenleaf is staying at a boarding house, using a false name. Bass watches for a day, confirming the identity. Then he walks up to Greenleaf's room and knocks on the door. When Greenleaf opens it, Bass is standing there with his rifle. 4 months, Bass says quietly. I've been tracking you for 4 months. You ready to surrender now? Greenleaf looks at him, looks at the determination in Bass's eyes, realizes that this man has tracked him across hundreds of miles, through every kind of terrain, for a third of a year, and he understands that running is pointless. He surrenders without a fight. At his trial, Greenleaf is asked why he didn't try to escape when Bass came for him. His answer, because I knew he'd just catch me again, and again, and again. What's the point? That 4-month pursuit cements Bass's reputation as someone who absolutely will not give up. Ever. No matter how long it takes. No matter how far he has to go. But tracking someone for months is one thing. Facing impossible odds is another. 1890. Bass gets a warrant for a man named Jim French. French is hiding with his gang in a fortified position. an old stone building with thick walls and limited entry points. The gang has supplies for weeks. They've got rifles and plenty of ammunition, and they've sworn they'll die before surrendering. Previous marshals who've attempted to arrest French have been driven back by gunfire. One was wounded. Another decided it was too dangerous and recommended waiting them out. Bass takes a different approach. He doesn't try a frontal assault, doesn't try to wait them out. Instead, he studies the building for 3 days, watches the gang's patterns, notes when they're most alert and when they relax, identifies their guard rotations, and he notices something. The building has a chimney, large chimney, old construction, and the gang is using it because nights are cold. Bass waits for the perfect moment, a cloudy night with no moon, the kind of darkness that's almost absolute. He climbs onto the roof of the building while the gang sleeps, moving slowly, carefully. Any noise, and they'll know someone's up there. He reaches the chimney, and he blocks it, completely, with rocks and dirt and anything else he can find. Then he climbs down and waits. Within an hour, smoke starts backing up into the building. The gang wakes up coughing. They try to clear the chimney from inside, but can't reach the blockage. The smoke gets worse. The building fills with it. Finally, they have no choice. They have to come outside or suffocate. Jim French stumbles out first, gasping for air, eyes streaming from the smoke. The rest of the gang follows, all of them coughing, disoriented, confused. And Bass Reeves is waiting, in the darkness, with his rifle trained on them. "Jim French," he calls out, "United States Marshal, drop your weapons." The gang members look around, trying to spot him in the darkness, but they can't see him, can't see anything beyond a few feet. "You can't see me," Bass continues, "but I can see you just fine. I've been watching this building for 3 days. I know exactly where you are. Drop the weapons, or I start shooting." They drop the weapons. Bass arrests the entire gang without firing a shot, just through patience, observation, and creative problem solving. And the story spreads. Bass Reeves doesn't just outgun criminals, he outthinks them. Then there's the case that shows his physical toughness, because tracking and thinking are important, but sometimes the job requires pure endurance. 1895. Bass is transporting 12 prisoners from Indian Territory to Fort Smith. 12. All of them chained together. All of them dangerous. It's a journey of over 150 miles through rough terrain. 2 days into the journey, Bass's horse goes lame. Can't carry him anymore. He has to continue on foot while leading the prisoners on their horses and walking his lame horse alongside. Most marshals would have sent for help, waited for backup. But Bass is deep in the territory. No backup is coming, and he has 12 prisoners who'd love nothing more than to escape or kill him. So he walks, for 5 days, leading 12 mounted prisoners while on foot himself, keeping them secured, staying alert, not showing weakness even though his feet are blistered and bleeding by the second day. The prisoners try to test him. One accidentally kicks his horse toward Bass, trying to knock him down. Bass sidesteps and yanks the reins so hard the horse stumbles. The prisoner nearly falls. "Try that again," Bass says quietly, "and you'll be walking too. In chains, for 100 miles. No one tries again. Another prisoner tries to convince the others to rush Bass. "He's on foot. We're mounted. We can take him." Bass overhears. "You're chained together. If you try to rush me, you'll be tangled up before you get close, and I'll shoot the first man who moves, then the second, then the third. See how many of you die before the rest decide it's a bad idea." They stay put. By the time Bass reaches Fort Smith, his boots are worn through. His feet are a mess, but all 12 prisoners are secure. And the other marshals who see him limp in with that chain gang can't believe he walked that far while guarding that many dangerous men. One marshal asks him how he did it. Bass's answer: "1 step at a time. What else could I do?" This becomes another element of the legend. Bass Reeves doesn't make excuses, doesn't wait for ideal conditions, doesn't need backup or perfect circumstances. He just does the job, whatever it takes. And sometimes what it takes is terrifying. 1893. Bass is tracking a killer named William Christie. Different Christie from the Winter case. Common name. This William Christie has murdered at least 5 people and possibly more. He's a psychopath. Enjoys killing. Collects trophies from his victims. Bass tracks him to a remote area. Finds him camped alone. Approaches carefully. Calls out the usual warning. United States Marshal, you're under arrest. Christie's response is to laugh. Actually laugh. You think you can take me alive, Marshal? You think I'm afraid of you? Don't have to be afraid, Bass says. Just have to surrender. Make this easy on both of us. Christie stands up. He's got a knife in one hand, a pistol in the other, and there's something wrong in his eyes. Something dead and cold. Tell you what, Christie says. I've killed 5 men with this knife. You'll be number 6. Then I'll take your badge as a trophy. Bass has his rifle. Could shoot Christie right now. Justified. The man is armed and threatening. Any court would clear it. But Bass gives him one more chance. Put down the weapons. Last warning. Christie charges, screaming, raising the knife. Bass shoots him. Single shot. Drops him instantly. It's over in seconds. But later, when Bass searches Christie's belongings, he finds the trophies. Scalps, fingers, personal items from victims, evidence of horrors that would give anyone nightmares. And that night, Bass has nightmares. Dreams about the victims, about what they must have suffered, about the evil he's witnessed over decades of chasing criminals. This is another cost of the job that the mythology ignores. The psychological toll, the things Bass saw, the horrors he encountered, the evil he had to confront. He arrested rapists, murderers, people who'd tortured their victims, people who'd killed children. And he had to maintain his composure, had to stay professional, had to keep doing the job, even when what he witnessed made him sick. Most people would have broken, would have needed counseling or support or a way to process the trauma. But those resources didn't exist in the 1890s, especially not for a black lawman. You just dealt with it, carried it, let it scar you, and kept going. Bass Reeves carried those scars. All of them. The physical injuries from gunfights and harsh conditions. The emotional wounds from seeing humanity's worst. The psychological burden of decades spent hunting evil. And he kept working, kept serving, kept maintaining his integrity, even when the darkness threatened to consume him. Because the alternative was letting evil win, was letting criminals go free, was abandoning the people who depended on him for protection. So he endured, one case at a time, one arrest at a time, one day at a time, building a record that would never be matched. By the mid-1890s, Bass Reeves wasn't just a deputy marshal anymore. He'd become something else entirely, a legend, a myth, a force that criminals whispered about in the darkness. And that transformation changed everything about how he worked and how criminals behaved. Let's talk about what it meant when your reputation preceded you. When outlaws knew your name before you ever met them. When the mere fact that Bass Reeves was coming after you changed your options and your future. There's a documented case from 1896 that illustrates this perfectly. A man named Jack Spaniard robs a bank in Arkansas, kills the bank manager during the robbery, flees into Indian Territory with 3 accomplices. They've got a good head start, plenty of money, and they think they're safe. Then word reaches them. Bass Reeves has the warrant. Spaniard's accomplices immediately abandon him. Just pack up and leave. They're willing to split up the money, willing to go their separate ways, because they know that if Bass Reeves is hunting Jack Spaniard, anyone associated with Spaniard is in danger. Spaniard tries to find other criminals to help him, offers to pay good money for protection, for lookouts, for someone to watch his back while he runs. No one takes the job. The money isn't worth it, because helping someone Bass Reeves is hunting is a good way to get arrested yourself, or killed if you're stupid enough to fight. So Spaniard runs alone, and he's terrified, not just of being caught, of Bass Reeves specifically, because he's heard the stories. Everyone has. The marshal who never stops, who can track you anywhere, who can disguise himself as anyone, who will find you no matter what. Spaniard lasts 3 weeks before the fear breaks him. He walks into a sheriff's office in a small town and surrenders. Asks to be held in jail until marshals from Fort Smith can collect him. When Bass arrives to transport him, Spaniard actually looks relieved. "At least it's over," he says. "At least I can stop running." Bass asks him why he surrendered instead of trying to hide. Spaniard's answer, "Because I knew you'd find me eventually, and the waiting was worse than the catching." This becomes a pattern. Criminals who hear Bass Reeves is after them start surrendering preemptively. Not all of them. The truly desperate or stupid still run, but a surprising number just give up. Turn themselves in. Face justice rather than spend weeks or months looking over their shoulder, waiting for the inevitable. And this changes the game entirely, because Bass Reeves is effectively solving crimes without even finding the criminals. His reputation does the work for him. Just the knowledge that he's coming is enough to make people surrender. The other deputy marshals notice this. Some of them resent it. Why does Bass get the easy cases where criminals surrender? Why does he get the glory? But the smart ones understand. Bass earned that reputation, spent decades building it, took risks, made sacrifices, did the impossible over and over until people believed nothing was impossible for him. One marshal, a man named Heck Thomas, who was respected in his own right, put it this way: Bass doesn't get easy cases. He makes cases easier by being Bass Reeves. There's a difference. And it's true, because Bass still took dangerous assignments, still tracked the criminals who wouldn't surrender, still put himself in harm's way. But his reputation gave him an additional tool: the psychological weapon of fear. Let's talk about how other lawmen viewed Bass Reeves, because this is complicated and reveals a lot about the racial dynamics of the era. At first, most white deputy marshals didn't want to work with him, didn't trust him, resented having to treat a black man as an equal. Some actively tried to undermine him, to make him fail so they could claim black lawmen weren't up to the job. But over time, that changed. Had to change. Because Bass was too good to ignore, too successful to dismiss, too valuable to the operation. There's a case from 1892 that forced many marshals to reconsider their prejudices. A gang of particularly violent outlaws is terrorizing the territory. They've killed 2 marshals already. Judge Parker assigns a team of 5 marshals to go after them. All white. Experienced men. Good trackers. Skilled gunfighters. They ride out confident. But 3 weeks later, they come back empty-handed. The gang outmaneuvered them, knew the terrain better, stayed ahead of pursuit. One marshal was wounded in a brief firefight. They couldn't get close. Judge Parker then assigns Bass Reeves. Solo. One man going after a gang that defeated 5. Some of the white marshals protest. It's suicide. The gang is too dangerous, too skilled. Even if they're racist, they don't want to see a fellow lawman killed. Bass takes the assignment anyway, and 36 days later, he returns with all 7 gang members in chains. No shots fired, no one injured. Just tracked them down, used his knowledge of the territory and criminal psychology, and brought them in. The white marshals who'd failed at the same task have to confront an uncomfortable truth. Bass Reeves isn't just as good as them. He's better. Demonstrably, undeniably better. This creates a shift, slowly, grudgingly, but real. Marshals start requesting to work with Bass on difficult cases. Start asking his advice on tracking techniques. Start defending him when civilians show him disrespect. Not all of them. Some stay racist to their core, but enough to create a core group of allies who judge him by his work, not his skin color. Heck Thomas becomes a genuine friend. So does a marshal named Bud Ledbetter. These men see past the racial prejudices of their time. See Bass as what he is, an exceptional lawman and a good man. There are documented cases of these marshals standing up for Bass when he faces discrimination. One incident in 1894 stands out. Bass and Heck Thomas are in a town between assignments. They go to a restaurant. The owner refuses to serve Bass. Bass is ready to just leave. He's used to this. Doesn't want to cause a scene. But Heck Thomas stands up. If he doesn't eat here, I don't eat here. We're both U.S. Marshals. We both risk our lives keeping this territory safe, and we both deserve a meal. The restaurant owner backs down, serves them both, and word of this spreads through the marshal service. The message is clear. Some of the white marshals have Bass's back. This matters more than it might seem, because Bass has spent his entire career essentially alone. The only black deputy marshal in a service full of white men. No one who truly understands his experience. No one facing the same pressures and prejudices. Having allies, even just a few, makes a difference. Reminds him he's not entirely alone in this fight. But even with allies, Bass faces challenges the white marshals never encounter. And one of those challenges nearly ends his career in 1902. There's a crime wave in the territory. Multiple robberies and murders. Evidence suggests a gang is operating, but the members are unknown. Judge Parker assigns multiple marshals to investigate. Bass is one of them. Bass starts gathering information, talking to witnesses, tracking suspects, and he begins to piece together who might be involved. One name keeps coming up. A man he knows. Someone he's crossed paths with before. His own son, Benny Reeves. Benny had been in trouble before. Minor crimes. Bass had hoped he'd straighten out. But now evidence suggests Benny is involved in serious crimes. Maybe even murder. Bass faces an impossible choice. Turn in his own son, or look the other way and betray everything he stands for. For some men, this wouldn't even be a question. Family comes first. You protect your own. Let someone else handle it. But Bass Reeves isn't some men. He's spent 30 years proving that the law applies to everyone equally, that justice is blind to race and relationship, that the badge means something. If he makes an exception for his own son, everything he's built crumbles. Every arrest he's made becomes questionable. Every principle he's stood for becomes hollow. He becomes exactly what his critics always said he was, someone who can't be trusted with authority. Bass investigates his own son, follows the evidence, confirms Benny's involvement in serious crimes, and then he does the hardest thing he's ever done. He arrests Benny himself. Think about that. Putting handcuffs on your own child, walking him to jail, testifying against him in court, watching him be convicted and sentenced to prison. The emotional cost is almost unimaginable. Bass's wife Nellie is devastated. His other children don't understand. The family is torn apart by it. And Bass carries the weight of having destroyed his own son's freedom in service to the law. But he does it anyway. Because principles matter. Because integrity isn't selective. Because if the law doesn't apply to his own family, why should anyone else respect it? The story spreads throughout the territory, and it does something remarkable. It solidifies Bass's reputation in a way nothing else could have. Criminals who thought maybe Bass would show favoritism, who thought maybe there were exceptions to his integrity, who thought maybe they could exploit some weakness. They all realize there are no exceptions. Bass Reeves cannot be compromised, cannot be bought, cannot be swayed by personal considerations. If he'll arrest his own son, he'll arrest anyone. Even the most racist critics have to admit, the man has principles, unshakable principles. But the cost to Bass personally is enormous. The relationship with Benny is destroyed. The family is fractured. The guilt of having failed as a father, of having raised a son who turned to crime, haunts him for the rest of his life. Years later, a fellow marshal asks him how he did it, how he arrested his own son. Bass's answer is quiet, pained. I didn't want to. It nearly killed me, but I had to. Because if I didn't, everything I've fought for means nothing. All the years of proving a black man can be trusted with the law. All the sacrifices. All the integrity. It would all be wasted if I put family above justice. But he's your son, the marshal says. He's my son, Bass agrees. And I love him. But I'm a U.S. Marshal. and sometimes being a marshal means doing things that break your heart. This incident reveals something crucial about Bass Reeves that the mythology often misses. He wasn't a hero because heroism came easily. He was a hero because he did the right thing even when it was devastatingly difficult, even when it cost him everything, even when it would have been understandable to make an exception. He chose integrity over comfort, justice over family, principles over personal happiness. Not because he was inhuman, but because he understood that the badge he wore represented something bigger than himself. And protecting that meaning mattered more than protecting his own heart. After Benny's arrest and conviction, some people expected Bass to resign, to retire, to step away from the job that had cost him so much. He was in his 60s by then. He'd served for decades. He'd more than earned the right to rest. But Bass didn't resign. He kept working, kept serving warrants, kept tracking criminals, because the work still mattered. The need for justice hadn't diminished, and walking away felt like quitting, like admitting the cost was too high. So he endured. One more case, one more arrest, one more day of carrying a burden that would have crushed anyone else. And his legend continued to grow. Not despite the Benny situation, but partly because of it. Because people understood. This is a man who cannot be corrupted, cannot be compromised, cannot be turned from his duty by anything, even love for his own child. That knowledge changed how criminals viewed him, changed how the public viewed him, changed how other lawmen viewed him. He became more than just a skilled tracker or a deadly shot. He became a symbol of integrity, of incorruptibility, of the idea that justice should be equal and impartial. But symbols aren't human. They don't hurt or grieve or struggle. And Bass Reeves was deeply, profoundly human. The pain of arresting Benny never left him. The nightmares of violence he'd witnessed never stopped. The exhaustion of fighting prejudice every single day never eased. He just kept going anyway, because that's what heroes do. Not in the moments of glory, but in the quiet suffering afterward. In the choice to keep serving even when the cost seems unbearable. In the decision to maintain your principles, even when your heart is breaking. By the turn of the century, Bass Reeves was in his 60s, an age when most men of his era were retired or dead, an age when the physical demands of being a deputy marshal should have been impossible. Yet Bass was still riding out into the territory, still tracking criminals, still making arrests that would challenge men half his age. But the world was changing around him, and those changes would test him in new ways. Indian Territory was being transformed. The federal government was pushing for statehood. The wild frontier was being tamed, settled, civilized. Towns were growing. Roads were being built. The lawless wilderness that had defined the territory for decades was slowly disappearing. This meant the nature of crime was changing too. The old-style outlaws, the gangs who'd terrorized the territory for years, were dying out. Some were in prison. Some were dead. Some had fled to other territories or gone straight. The ones who remained were either the most desperate or the most stupid. But new criminals were emerging. Con men who exploited settlers. Corrupt businessmen who cheated land claims. Sophisticated fraudsters who operated through legal loopholes. The kind of crime that required investigation, not tracking. Paperwork, not gunfights. Some of the older marshals struggled with this transition. They were frontier lawmen, good at tracking and shooting and surviving in the wilderness, not good at understanding complex fraud schemes or navigating legal technicalities. Bass Reeves adapted. He learned about the new crimes, studied land claim laws, understood business regulations, taught himself to recognize the signs of sophisticated fraud the way he'd learned to recognize tracks in the wilderness. 1903. There's a land fraud scheme operating in the territory. A group of men are filing false claims on Native American land. They're using forged documents and bribed officials. It's complicated, technical, the kind of case that requires understanding paperwork and regulations. Judge Parker assigns it to Bass. Some people question the choice. This isn't tracking an outlaw through the wilderness. This is a white-collar crime. Wouldn't a different marshal be better suited? Bass takes the case, spends weeks going through documents, learning about land claim procedures, talking to victims, building a case piece by piece. It's tedious work, exhausting in a different way than physical manhunts. But Bass is thorough. He identifies the ringleaders, traces the fake documents back to their source, gathers evidence of the bribes, and when he makes his arrests, he has ironclad cases, every document cataloged, every piece of evidence properly collected, every legal requirement met. The fraudsters are convicted. The land is returned to its rightful owners. And Bass proves he's not just a tracker or a gunfighter. He's a complete lawman who can adapt to whatever the job requires. But adaptation has its limits. And Bass is feeling his age in ways he can't ignore anymore. His joints ache from decades of sleeping on hard ground in all kinds of weather. His hands, once so steady they could shoot the wings off a fly, occasionally tremble. His eyes, still sharp enough to track, aren't quite as keen as they used to be. His hearing, damaged by countless gunshots over the years, has dulled. Most men would retire, would admit that age has caught up to them, would take their pension and rest. Bass keeps working, but he's smart about it. He takes assignments closer to Fort Smith when possible, works with younger marshals more often, shares his knowledge and experience with the next generation, becomes as much a teacher as an active lawman. There's a young marshal named Grant Johnson, black man like Bass, one of the few who followed in his footsteps. Johnson idolizes Bass, wants to be just like him. Bass takes Johnson under his wing, teaches him tracking, shares the tricks he's learned over decades, explains how to read criminals, how to avoid ambushes, how to maintain integrity under pressure. One day, Johnson asks Bass for advice about handling prejudice, about being a black lawman in a white man's world. Bass's answer is characteristically direct. You can't control what people think about you because of your skin color. You can only control what they think about you because of your actions. So make your actions speak so loudly, they can't hear anything else. But don't some people refuse to listen? Johnson asks. No matter how good you are? Yes, Bass admits. Some people will hate you just for existing, will deny your accomplishments, will never give you credit. You can't win with those people. Don't waste your energy trying. Focus on the ones who judge you fairly, and on doing the work so well that even your enemies have to grudgingly respect your skill. This becomes Bass's role in his later years. Mentor, teacher, living example. He's still taking cases, still making arrests, but he's also ensuring his knowledge doesn't die with him, that the lessons he's learned through hard experience are passed on. And there are lighter moments too. Stories that remind us Bass Reeves was more than just a grimly determined lawman. He had humor, enjoyed life when he could, found moments of joy even in difficult circumstances. 1905. Bass is tracking a horse thief named Billy Morton. Not a violent man, not dangerous, just a thief who can't resist stealing horses. Bass has arrested him twice before. Each time, Morton serves his sentence, gets released, and immediately steals another horse. Bass finds Morton at a remote farm, trying to sell a stolen mare. Morton sees Bass riding up and actually sighs. "Marshal Reeves," he says, "I should have known." "Billy," Bass replies, "you should have. This is the third time." I know, I can't help it. I see a good horse and I just have to take it." Bass shakes his head. "Billy, you're terrible at being a horse thief. You get caught every single time. Maybe try a different career." "Like what?" "Literally anything else. You could be a farmer, a blacksmith, a store clerk, anything where you don't have to steal horses and end up in jail." Morton thinks about this seriously. "You really think I could do something else?" "I think," Bass says, "that you're wasting your life on a crime you're bad at. But that's your choice to make. Right now, my choice is to arrest you for horse theft. Again." Morton comes along peacefully, and at his trial, he actually takes Bass's advice to heart, tells the judge he wants to learn a trade in prison, wants to do something with his life besides stealing horses and disappointing Marshal Reeves. The judge, amused, sentences Morton to 2 years with the recommendation he be taught blacksmithing. Morton serves his time, learns the trade, and actually goes straight afterward. Becomes a successful blacksmith in a small town. Never steals another horse. Years later, Bass passes through that town. Morton sees him and runs over to shake his hand. "Marshal Reeves, look!" Morton shows him the blacksmith shop, the honest business he's built. "You were right. I was terrible at being a horse thief, but I'm pretty good at this." Bass smiles, one of his rare, genuine smiles. "Glad to hear it, Billy. Real glad." It's a small moment, not dramatic, not the stuff of legends, but it shows another side of Bass Reeves. He didn't just punish criminals. He genuinely wanted them to do better, to find legitimate paths, to turn their lives around. Not all of them did. Most didn't. But the ones who did, Bass remembered them, took pride in them, saw them as proof that justice was about more than punishment. It was about giving people the chance to choose better. But not every story from Bass's later years was light. Some were reminders that even in his 60s, the job remained dangerous. 1907. Oklahoma achieves statehood. Indian Territory officially ceases to exist. The jurisdiction that Bass has policed for over 30 years is gone. The federal court at Fort Smith loses its authority over the new state. The era of the deputy marshals is ending. Many marshals retire immediately. The job is over. Time to rest. But Bass isn't ready to stop. He's been a lawman for too long. Doesn't know how to be anything else. He takes a job as a police officer in Muskogee, Oklahoma. It's not the same as being a deputy marshal. The territory is smaller. The crimes are more mundane. But it's still law enforcement. Still serving and protecting. Still the work he's dedicated his life to. And even at this stage, even working as a city cop in his late 60s, Bass remains formidable. 1908. There's a violent drunk terrorizing a neighborhood in Muskogee. He's a big man, strong, aggressive. Multiple officers have tried to arrest him. All have failed. The man fights viciously and has injured several officers. Bass volunteers to handle it. The younger officers are skeptical. Bass is old. This suspect is young and violent. It could be dangerous for him. Bass goes anyway. Finds the drunk causing trouble in a saloon. Approaches calmly. "Sir, you're disturbing the peace. I'm placing you under arrest." The drunk looks at this old black cop and laughs. "You? You're going to arrest me, old man?" "Yes," Bass says simply. The drunk takes a swing. Bass ducks it easily, grabs the man's arm, uses his momentum against him, and in a move practiced over decades of arrests, flips the drunk face first onto the floor and pins him with one knee while cuffing him. The whole thing takes maybe 5 seconds. The drunk is too stunned to resist effectively. By the time he realizes what's happening, he's already in handcuffs. Bass hauls him to his feet. "Let's go." As they walk to the jail, the drunk asks, "How'd you do that? You're old." Bass's response, "Age and treachery beat youth and strength every time." The other officers who witness this are amazed. This 69-year-old man just subdued someone who'd injured multiple younger officers, made it look easy, proved that experience and skill matter more than youth and strength. But Bass knows his time is limited. The aches are getting worse. The fatigue sets in faster. He can still do the job, but it's getting harder. And he's starting to think about what comes next. 1909. Bass retires from law enforcement after 34 years of service. 34 years of tracking criminals. 34 years of upholding the law. 34 years of proving that a former slave could be the best lawman in America. He's 71 years old. His body is worn out from decades of hard use. He's earned his rest. More than earned it. He's given everything to the job. His youth, his health, part of his family. He has nothing left to prove. He moves back to his farm. Plans to spend his remaining time with family. To finally rest. To enjoy the peace he's fought for, but never personally experienced. But retirement doesn't suit him. After a lifetime of action, of purpose, of serving something bigger than himself, sitting still feels wrong. Like he's waiting to die instead of living. He grows restless. Nellie sees it. The other members of his family see it. Bass Reeves without a badge is like a wild animal in a cage. He needs purpose, needs to feel useful. So he finds small ways to contribute, advises local law enforcement, helps settle disputes in the community, becomes a respected elder whose wisdom is sought on various matters. And he tells stories about his years as a marshal, about the criminals he caught and the dangers he faced, about what it meant to wear the badge and uphold the law. Young people, both black and white, come to hear these stories, to learn from this living legend, to understand what he accomplished and how he did it. Bass is careful in these tellings. He doesn't glorify the violence, doesn't make himself out to be superhuman. He talks about the fear he felt, the mistakes he made, the times he got lucky, the people who helped him, the sacrifices required. He wants people to understand. Excellence isn't about being perfect. It's about being persistent, about maintaining your integrity even when it's hard, about doing the right thing even when no one's watching, about serving something bigger than yourself. One young black man asks him what his greatest accomplishment was, expecting him to mention a famous arrest or a dangerous manhunt. Bass thinks for a long moment, then says, "Never compromising my principles. Not once in 34 years. That's what I'm most proud of. Not the arrests or the gunfights. The fact that I kept my word, treated people fairly, did the job right. That matters more than anything else." This is the wisdom of Bass Reeves in his final years. The understanding that reputation is built through consistent integrity. That respect is earned through fairness and competence. That legacy is determined not by your best day, but by your typical day repeated thousands of times. He lives simply in retirement, doesn't seek fame or glory, doesn't demand recognition for his accomplishments. He just lives quietly, surrounded by family, finally able to rest after decades of service. But the rest doesn't last long. In 1910, Bass Reeves becomes ill. His body, worn out from decades of hard use, is failing. The aches that plagued him for years become severe. His strength, legendary for so long, fades rapidly. He knows he's dying, and he faces it with the same calm determination he brought to everything else in his life. No complaints, no fear, just acceptance that his time is ending. January 12th, 1910. Bass Reeves dies at his home in Muskogee, Oklahoma. He's 71 years old. His wife Nellie is at his side. His children gather around him, and the man who was once the most feared lawman in America passes quietly, surrounded by the family he sacrificed so much time with to serve the law. The funeral is surprisingly large. Hundreds of people attend. Fellow lawmen, both black and white. People he arrested who respect him for treating them fairly. Native Americans whose communities he protected. Ordinary citizens whose lives were safer because of his work. The eulogies speak of his courage, his integrity, his skill, his fairness, his unwavering commitment to justice. They talk about the over 3,000 arrests, the 14 justified shootings, the 34 years of service without a single substantiated complaint of corruption or abuse of authority. The newspapers report his death. The Muskogee Times-Democrat runs a respectful obituary, notes his long career, mentions some of his famous cases, calls him one of the greatest lawmen the frontier ever produced. For a brief moment, it seems like Bass Reeves will be remembered, like his story will be told and retold, like future generations will know about the former slave who became a legendary marshal. Then something terrible happens. His story starts to disappear. Within a few years, the details begin to fade from public memory. The newspapers that reported his death get thrown away or lost. The people who knew him personally die off, taking their memories with them. The official records of his arrests and service exist, but they're buried in archives that few people access. And most significantly, the popular culture of the time decides that stories about black heroes don't sell. That white audiences don't want to hear about a black lawman, no matter how exceptional. That if you're going to tell stories about the Old West, The heroes need to be white. The mythology of the Wild West was being created in the early 1900s. Dime novels. Later, movies. Stories about cowboys and lawmen and gunfighters. And those stories were almost exclusively about white men. Buffalo Bill, Wyatt Earp, Wild Bill Hickok, Billy the Kid, Jesse James. Bass Reeves, despite having a more impressive record than almost any of them, got erased. Not deliberately, maybe. Not through some conscious conspiracy. Just through the casual racism of an era that couldn't imagine a black man as a hero worthy of celebration. There's a bitter irony here. Many of the white lawmen who became famous legends had questionable records. Wyatt Earp was involved in shootings that may have been murders. Wild Bill Hickok killed men in circumstances that were dubious at best. Pat Garrett possibly shot Billy the Kid in the back. These men became icons, despite their moral ambiguity. Bass Reeves, who had a clean record, who followed the law meticulously, who treated criminals fairly, and never abused his authority, got forgotten. Because he was black. Because the culture couldn't handle the cognitive dissonance of admitting a former slave was better at upholding the law than the white heroes they wanted to celebrate. And so for decades, Bass Reeves' story gathered dust in archives. His descendants knew about him, passed down stories through the family. A few historians mentioned him in passing, but the general public had no idea he existed. Meanwhile, a fictional character was created, a masked lawman, a ranger who operated in the Old West, who had a Native American companion, who was known for his skill and integrity and for always getting his man. A character who became one of the most famous heroes in American popular culture. The Lone Ranger. The radio show debuted in 1933, the television show in 1949, movies, comics, merchandise. The Lone Ranger became an icon, a symbol of frontier justice and American values. And here's what many people don't know. The Lone Ranger was likely inspired by Bass Reeves. The creator of the character never explicitly confirmed this, but the similarities are striking. Too striking to be coincidence. A lawman who operated in Indian Territory, who had a Native American companion who spoke multiple tribal languages, who was known for his disguises and his ability to track anyone, who was legendary for his marksmanship and his integrity, who always brought criminals in alive when possible, who wore a distinctive badge. Strip away the mask and the white horse and the hi-yo silver, and you have Bass Reeves, the actual historical figure who did all these things for real. But the fictional version was white. Because of course he was. Because 1930s America couldn't handle a black hero, even though the real hero had been black. So Bass Reeves' actual accomplishments were used to create a fictional white hero. His story was stolen, whitewashed, and sold to audiences who never knew the truth. That the real Lone Ranger was a former slave from Arkansas who became the greatest lawman of his era. This cultural theft compounds the tragedy of his erasure. Not only was he forgotten, but his legacy was appropriated for a character that specifically excluded the possibility of him being the hero. Decades pass. The 1920s, the 1930s, the 1940s, World War II, the civil rights movement beginning to stir, and still, Bass Reeves remains largely unknown outside of a small circle of historians and his own descendants. But then something starts to happen, slowly at first. A trickle of interest, then growing stronger. In the 1960s and 1970s, as the civil rights movement forces America to confront its racial history, historians begin digging deeper into black history, looking for stories that were suppressed or ignored, searching through archives for evidence of African American achievements that had been erased from the popular narrative. And they find Bass Reeves. They find the arrest records, over 3,000 documented arrests. They find the court testimony, the newspaper accounts from his era, the sworn statements from fellow marshals, the evidence that this man was real and his accomplishments were extraordinary. A historian named Art Burton becomes particularly interested in Bass Reeves, spends years researching him, tracking down descendants who still have family stories, combing through archives for every scrap of information. In 2006, Burton publishes Black Gun, Silver Star, the life and legend of frontier marshal Bass Reeves. the first comprehensive biography, the book that finally brings Bass Reeves' story back into public consciousness. And people are stunned. How did we not know about this man? How was someone this remarkable, with a record this impressive, forgotten for nearly a century? The answer, of course, is racism, the systematic erasure of black excellence from American historical narratives, the refusal to acknowledge that black people could be heroes, the cultural need to make all frontier legends white, even when the actual history showed otherwise. But now, finally, the truth was coming out. Bass Reeves was being rediscovered. His story was being told. And people were beginning to understand the magnitude of what he'd accomplished. Not just the arrests, or the gunfights, or the tracking, but the integrity, the fairness, the persistence, the ability to maintain his principles in a world designed to corrupt him. The choice to arrest his own son rather than compromise his values. The decades of proving, over and over, that excellence has no color. The rediscovery accelerates. More books are published. Articles are written. Documentaries are made. Statues are erected in his honor. Schools and buildings are named after him. Oklahoma, the state that emerged from the territory he policed, begins to embrace him as one of its greatest historical figures. In 2011, a bronze statue of Bass Reeves is unveiled at Pendergraft Park in Fort Smith, Arkansas. The inscription reads, Bass Reeves, U.S., Deputy Marshal 1875 to 1907. He was one of the greatest frontier heroes in our nation's history. In 2012, Bass Reeves is inducted into the Texas Rangers Hall of Fame, an honor recognizing his contribution to law enforcement in the American West. His descendants, who've been telling his story for generations within their families, finally see the world acknowledge what they've always known. That Bass Reeves was exceptional, that his accomplishments deserve recognition, that his story deserves to be told, and the Lone Ranger connection becomes publicly discussed, not officially confirmed perhaps. The estate that owns the Lone Ranger rights isn't going to admit their white hero was based on a black lawman. But historians and cultural critics point out the parallels. Note the suspicious similarities. Ask uncomfortable questions about cultural appropriation and historical erasure. Some people resist this. Want to keep believing the Lone Ranger was an original creation. Want to deny that white America built its cowboy mythology partly by stealing the stories of black cowboys and lawmen who were systematically excluded from the official narrative. But the evidence is there, and more people are paying attention to it. Understanding that American history is more complicated, more diverse, and more interesting than the whitewashed version we were taught. Bass Reeves' story becomes part of a larger reckoning with American history, part of understanding that black cowboys were common in the Old West, that roughly 1 in 4 cowboys were African American, that many of the skills associated with frontier life, tracking, breaking horses, survival in harsh conditions, were skills that enslaved people had learned and brought with them to freedom. The mythology of the West as an exclusively white space was always a lie. A convenient fiction that erased the contributions of black cowboys, Mexican vaqueros, Native American guides, and Chinese laborers who actually built the infrastructure of the frontier. Bass Reeves' rediscovery helps shatter that mythology, shows that excellence existed in unexpected places, that heroism came in colors the popular culture didn't want to acknowledge, that the real history is always more complex and more interesting than the simplified versions we prefer. But rediscovery, while important, doesn't undo the harm of erasure. It doesn't change the fact that Bass Reeves died without receiving the recognition he deserved, that he never saw his story celebrated in popular culture, that he was denied the fame that less accomplished white lawmen received. It doesn't change the fact that generations of black children grew up without knowing they had heroes like Bass Reeves, without seeing themselves represented in the mythology of the American West, without understanding that their ancestors were central to frontier history, not peripheral to it. The erasure had real consequences, shaped how Americans understood their history, shaped who got to be heroes in the popular imagination, shaped what kinds of stories were told and who got to tell them. And those consequences persist even as Bass Reeves' story is rediscovered. Because rediscovery is not the same as never having been erased. The damage was done. The decades of silence matter. The cultural theft matters. But at least now, finally, the truth is being told. At least Bass Reeves is getting some of the recognition he earned. At least new generations can learn about him and understand what he represented. And his story resonates in the modern era for specific reasons. Because we're still grappling with questions about law enforcement and race, still dealing with issues of who gets to have authority and how that authority is used, still seeing examples of police corruption and abuse of power. Bass Reeves stands as a counterexample to all of that, a lawman who had every reason to be bitter and abusive, given what he'd experienced as a slave and as a black man in a white supremacist society, but who chose integrity instead, who used his authority fairly, who never compromised his principles. He proves it's possible, that law enforcement can be just, that power doesn't have to corrupt, that badges can be worn by people who actually care about justice, not just about asserting dominance. His story challenges us. If a former slave in the 1880s could maintain his integrity for 34 years as a lawman, what excuse do modern police have for corruption and abuse? If Bass Reeves could treat everyone fairly, even the people who showed him no fairness in return, why can't contemporary law enforcement do the same? These are uncomfortable questions, but they're important questions, and Bass Reeves' life provides both inspiration and a standard to measure against. Not that he was perfect. The mythology that's been built around him in recent years sometimes makes the same mistake the original erasure did, reducing him to a symbol instead of understanding him as a complex human being. Bass Reeves had flaws, made mistakes, struggled with doubt and fear and exhaustion, paid terrible prices for his dedication to duty, lost relationships, missed huge portions of his children's lives, arrested his own son, and lived with that pain for the rest of his days. He was human, deeply, profoundly human, and that humanity is important to remember. Because his story is inspiring not because he was superhuman, but because he was human and chose excellence anyway. Chose integrity despite the cost. Chose duty despite the sacrifice. So what do we take from the life of Bass Reeves? What lessons does his story offer us more than a century after his death? Because understanding his accomplishments is one thing. Learning from them is another. And there's so much to learn from how he lived and what he achieved. First, there's the fundamental lesson about persistence in the face of doubt. When Bass Reeves accepted that badge in 1875, almost everyone doubted him. White society said a former slave couldn't be trusted with authority. Criminals said he'd be easy to kill or corrupt. Even some people who supported him probably had private doubts about whether he could actually succeed in such a dangerous job. Bass didn't waste energy arguing with the doubters, didn't try to convince them through words. He just did the work, day after day, year after year, arrest after arrest, until the evidence of his competence was so overwhelming that even his harshest critics couldn't deny it. That's a lesson for anyone facing doubt or prejudice. Words rarely convince people who've already decided you're inferior or incapable. But consistent excellence? That's harder to ignore, not impossible. Some people will deny your accomplishments no matter what, but enough people will eventually acknowledge the truth if you make it undeniable through your actions. Second, there's the lesson about integrity under pressure. Bass Reeves faced constant temptation to compromise, to take bribes, to abuse his authority, to use his badge to settle personal scores or prove points. The system was corrupt enough that he probably could have gotten away with it. Other marshals were doing it. Why not him? But he never did. Not once in 34 years. Not when it would have been easy. Not when it would have been profitable. Not when it would have been emotionally satisfying to put a racist in his place using his badge. He understood something crucial. His integrity was his power. The moment he compromised it, he became like every other corrupt lawman. His reputation, his effectiveness, his legacy, all of it depended on being incorruptible. So he was, absolutely, without exception. That's a lesson about understanding what actually matters. Short-term gains from corruption would have cost him the long-term respect he earned through integrity. He saw that clearly and chose accordingly. Third, there's the lesson about sacrifice and service. Bass Reeves didn't have an easy life. Being a marshal meant constant danger, long separations from family, grinding poverty at times, and endless prejudice. He could have chosen a safer path, a more comfortable existence, a life that didn't demand so much. But he believed the work mattered. That Indian territory needed law and order, that protecting innocent people from criminals was worth the personal cost. That proving a black man could uphold the law with excellence was important not just for him, but for everyone who would come after him. So he made the sacrifices, and they were real sacrifices. His daughter not recognizing him after a long manhunt, missing his children growing up, the physical toll of decades sleeping on hard ground in brutal weather, the psychological cost of witnessing so much violence and evil. He paid those prices because he believed in something bigger than his personal comfort. That's a lesson about service, about choosing duty over ease, about understanding that some things matter enough to sacrifice for. Fourth, and this is important, there's a lesson about maintaining humanity in a dehumanizing system. Bass Reeves operated in a society that declared him less than human because of his skin color. That treated him as property for the first part of his life. That showed him disrespect and hatred even when he was protecting people with his service. He could have responded by becoming hard, bitter, cruel, by treating others with the same lack of humanity he experienced, by using his badge to inflict pain on the people who inflicted pain on him. That's what trauma often does. It creates cycles of harm where the harmed become the harmers. Bass Reeves broke that cycle. He treated criminals with fairness even when the criminals showed him no fairness. He gave people chances to surrender when others would have shot first. He maintained his basic decency in a world that gave him every reason to abandon it. That's not weakness. That's strength of the highest order. The strength to be merciful when you have power. To be fair when you've experienced injustice. To maintain your humanity when everything is trying to strip it from you. Fifth, there's a profound lesson about the relationship between excellence and respect. Bass Reeves couldn't demand respect. The society he lived in had decided he didn't deserve it based on his race. But he could earn respect through being so good at his job that denial became absurd. And that's what he did. He became the best. Not the best black marshal. The best marshal, period. So skilled at tracking that criminals feared him. So fair in his dealings that even outlaws trusted his word. So consistent in his integrity that judges relied on his testimony completely. He understood that excellence is the most powerful argument. You can't force people to respect you, but you can make them respect your work. And if your work is exceptional enough, consistently enough, some of that respect transfers to you as a person. This doesn't mean prejudice disappears through excellence. Bass Reeves was still denied service at restaurants, still called slurs, still treated as inferior by people whose lives he'd saved. Excellence doesn't cure racism or bigotry, but it does create a foundation that's harder to ignore or dismiss. Sixth, and this connects to the previous point, there's a lesson about the burden of representation. Bass Reeves couldn't just be good at his job. He had to be perfect, because any mistake he made would be used to justify denying opportunities to all black people. Any failure would be cited as proof that black men couldn't handle authority. That's an enormous burden, one that white lawmen didn't carry. They could fail individually without it reflecting on their entire race. Bass Reeves couldn't. He was representing every black person who might want to be a lawman. Every formerly enslaved person who wanted to prove their capabilities. Every person who'd been told they were inferior and wanted to demonstrate otherwise. And he carried that burden for 34 years without breaking. That's extraordinary. But it's also tragic, because that burden shouldn't exist. People should be allowed to fail individually without it being used to condemn their entire group. But that wasn't the world Bass Reeves lived in. So he succeeded, consistently, under pressure that would have crushed most people. The lesson here is complex. On one hand, understanding what pioneers and firsts carry helps us appreciate their accomplishments more fully. On the other hand, recognizing the injustice of that burden should motivate us to create a world where people don't have to be perfect representatives of their race or group just to be given opportunities. Seventh, there's a lesson about adaptability. Bass Reeves didn't just master one set of skills and coast on them for decades. He constantly adapted to changing circumstances. When crime shifted from frontier outlaws to sophisticated fraud, he learned about fraud. When tracking through wilderness became less important than understanding legal technicalities, he learned the law. When his physical abilities declined with age, he adapted his methods to rely more on experience and intelligence. He never stopped learning, never stopped growing, never rested on his reputation or past accomplishments. He understood that excellence requires constant adaptation, that the world changes and you change with it or become obsolete. That's a lesson for anyone in any field. The skills that made you successful yesterday might not be enough tomorrow. You have to keep learning. Keep adapting. Keep finding ways to remain effective even as circumstances change. Eighth, there's a lesson about choosing your battles. Bass Reeves faced racism every single day. He could have spent all his energy fighting every instance of prejudice he encountered, arguing with every person who disrespected him, demanding acknowledgement and equality in every interaction. But he didn't. He focused his energy on the work, on being so good at his job that his excellence spoke for itself. He didn't waste time on arguments he couldn't win or people who'd already decided to hate him. He just did the work, and let his work do the arguing. This doesn't mean he accepted racism or that he should have. It means he understood strategic focus, that fighting every battle would exhaust him and accomplish little. But fighting the battle that mattered, proving black people were capable of excellence, that was worth his energy. The lesson isn't to ignore injustice. It's to be strategic about where you invest your limited energy. To understand that sometimes the most powerful response to doubt is simply proving the doubters wrong through your accomplishments. Ninth, there's a lesson about the cost of justice. Because Bass Reeves' story isn't just inspirational. It's also cautionary. He achieved greatness, yes, but at enormous personal cost. He missed his children growing up, arrested his own son, carried psychological trauma from the violence he witnessed, wore his body down through decades of hard use, and in the end, he died largely unrecognized. His story was erased. His accomplishments were stolen for a fictional white hero. He didn't get to see himself celebrated in popular culture or recognized as the legend he was. Was it worth it? That's not for us to answer. Bass Reeves made his choice, believed the work mattered enough to make the sacrifices. But his story reminds us that choosing duty and service comes with real costs, that heroes pay prices we often don't acknowledge, that the people we celebrate often suffered in ways we don't see. The lesson is to appreciate sacrifice, while also questioning whether we're asking too much of the people who serve, whether the costs they pay are necessary, or whether we could create better systems that don't require such enormous personal sacrifice for the sake of justice. 10th, there's a lesson about the power of consistency. Bass Reeves made over 3,000 arrests. That number is staggering, but what's more important than the number is the consistency. He didn't have a few spectacular successes and many failures. He was excellent consistently, day after day, case after case, year after year. That consistency is what built his reputation. Anyone can have a good day. Anyone can pull off one impressive feat, but doing it over and over and over, that's what separates the truly exceptional from the merely talented. The lesson is that consistent good work beats sporadic brilliance, that reliability matters more than occasional heroics, that building a lasting legacy requires showing up and doing your best not just when you feel like it, but every time, for decades. 11th, there's a lesson about the importance of mentorship. In his later years, Bass Reeves taught younger marshals, shared his knowledge, made sure the skills and wisdom he'd accumulated didn't die with him. He understood that excellence isn't just about personal achievement. It's about creating the conditions for others to achieve as well. Grant Johnson and other black marshals who followed Bass benefited from his mentorship. They didn't have to figure everything out from scratch. They could learn from his experience, build on his foundation, and that made them more effective lawmen. The lesson is that if you achieve something difficult, especially if you're a pioneer, you have a responsibility to help others follow, to make the path easier for the next generation, to ensure your hard-won knowledge benefits more than just yourself. 12th, and this is perhaps the most important lesson. Bass Reeves' story teaches us about the difference between history and mythology. For nearly a century, the mythology of the American West was almost exclusively white. Cowboys and lawmen and gunfighters were imagined as white heroes, fighting for justice and civilization. But the real history was different. Black cowboys were common. Mexican vaqueros were essential. Native Americans were central. Chinese laborers built the infrastructure. The frontier was diverse, multiracial, complex. Bass Reeves' erasure and eventual rediscovery teaches us to question the stories we're told, to ask who's missing from our historical narratives, to understand that absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence. Sometimes people were just deliberately erased from the record. The lesson is to be curious about what we don't know, to seek out the stories that were suppressed or ignored, to understand that history is written by those with power, and people without power often get written out, even when they were central to events. 13th, there's a lesson about justice versus vengeance. Bass Reeves could have used his badge to settle scores, to take revenge on the kind of people who'd enslaved him, who'd treated him as property, who showed him constant disrespect. He had the power. He had the justification. Many people would have understood if he'd bent the rules when dealing with particularly racist criminals, but he never did. He understood that justice isn't about revenge. It's about fairness, about applying the law equally to everyone, about treating even people who hate you with the baseline dignity the law requires. That's a lesson our current moment desperately needs. When we see injustice, the temptation is often to respond with counter-injustice, to abandon fairness because we're angry about unfairness, to become the thing we hate in our effort to fight it. Bass Reeves shows another way. Justice that remains just even when it would be emotionally satisfying to abandon it. Fairness that's truly fair, not just fair to people who deserve it. Rules that apply to everyone, including yourself and the people you care about. 14th, there's a lesson about the long arc of recognition. Bass Reeves died without seeing his story celebrated, without knowing he'd eventually be recognized as one of the greatest lawmen in American history, without understanding that future generations would study his life and draw inspiration from his example. He did the work anyway, not for fame, not for recognition, not because he knew he'd be remembered, but because the work mattered in the moment, because justice needed to be served regardless of whether anyone would celebrate him for serving it. That's a lesson about intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation, about doing what's right because it's right, not because you'll be rewarded for it, about understanding that impact matters more than acknowledgement. And it's also a lesson about patience and hope, because Bass Reeves' story wasn't lost forever. It was eventually recovered, eventually recognized, eventually celebrated, not in his lifetime, but in time. Sometimes justice is slow. Sometimes recognition takes generations. Sometimes the impact of your work isn't visible until long after you're gone. But that doesn't make the work less important. It just means we need patience and faith that truth eventually emerges. Finally, there's a lesson about what it means to be a hero. Because Bass Reeves wasn't a hero in the Hollywood sense. He didn't have dramatic shootouts every day, didn't deliver inspiring speeches, didn't pose heroically or seek glory. He was a hero in the truest sense, someone who showed up and did difficult work with integrity, someone who maintained his principles under pressure, someone who chose duty over comfort, someone who served others at great personal cost, someone who proved that excellence knows no color, and character transcends circumstance. That's real heroism, not the flashy kind, the grinding, persistent, consistent kind, the kind that doesn't make for easy storytelling, but changes the world more profoundly than dramatic gestures ever could. Let's come back to where we started, to the question of respect, to the claim that a former slave could never command it, to the doubters who said Bass Reeves might enforce the law, but would never truly be feared, never truly be respected, never truly be recognized as the equal of white lawmen. They were wrong. Catastrophically, undeniably, historically wrong. Bass Reeves commanded more respect than almost any lawman of his era. Outlaws feared him more than they feared death. Judges trusted his word absolutely. Fellow marshals, even the racist ones, had to acknowledge his superiority. Communities begged for him specifically when they had problems. Criminals surrendered rather than face him. His name alone was enough to make hardened killers reconsider their choices. That's not just respect. That's something beyond respect. That's a reputation so powerful it becomes its own form of law enforcement, where your very existence changes criminal behavior, where the knowledge that you're coming is enough to make people turn themselves in. And he earned it, every bit of it, not through luck or connections or privilege, through 34 years of relentless excellence, through maintaining his integrity when corruption would have been easier, through treating everyone fairly when he had every reason to be bitter and vengeful, through choosing duty over comfort, service over safety, justice over personal satisfaction. The respect Bass Reeves commanded wasn't given. It was taken through sheer competence and character, and once earned, it became undeniable. But here's what makes his story truly remarkable. It's not just that he earned respect despite being a former slave. It's that he did it while the system was actively working against him, while society was structured to deny him basic humanity, while every day brought new humiliations and challenges that white lawmen never faced. He succeeded not because the system gave him a chance, but because he was too good to be denied. His excellence was so overwhelming, so consistent, so undeniable that even a white supremacist society had to acknowledge it. Not happily, not willingly, but inevitably. That's power. Real power. Not the power of force or authority, though Bass had both. The power of being so good at what you do that reality itself bends to acknowledge you. The power of consistency that becomes impossible to ignore. The power of integrity that stands as an eternal rebuke to corruption. And this power echoes across the generations. Because Bass Reeves proved something that needed proving. That excellence has no color. That character transcends circumstance. That the content of your work matters more than the condition of your birth. That a man born into slavery could become the greatest lawman the frontier ever produced. These weren't theoretical propositions for Bass. They were lived truths, demonstrated daily through decades of service, proven through thousands of arrests and countless moments of choosing the harder right over the easier wrong. Every time he gave a criminal the chance to surrender instead of shooting first. Every time he maintained his composure in the face of racial slurs and discrimination. Every time he followed procedure when cutting corners would have been simpler. Every time he told the truth when lying would have been convenient. He was proving something. Not trying to prove it. Just proving it. Through actions that spoke louder than any words ever could. And the proof accumulated, year after year, case after case, until even the most stubborn skeptics had to admit, this man is exceptional. This man is trustworthy. This man is exactly what a lawman should be. But Bass Reeves' legacy extends beyond his personal accomplishments, beyond the arrests and the gunfights and the legendary manhunts. His legacy is about what he made possible for others. Every black lawman who came after him walked a path he'd cleared. Every person of color who wore a badge stood on foundations he'd built. Every community that accepted black authority figures did so partly because Bass Reeves had demonstrated that such authority could be just and fair and effective. He didn't do it alone. There were other black lawmen in the frontier, other people fighting for recognition and equality. But Bass Reeves was among the most successful, the most visible, the most undeniable. And his example mattered. Grant Johnson, the young Marshal Bass mentored, went on to a distinguished career of his own, arrested hundreds of criminals, became known for his own tracking skills and integrity. And when people asked him how he became such a good lawman, he'd point to Bass Reeves. "I learned from the best," he'd say. Other black marshals followed. Not many. The racism of the era limited opportunities, but more than there would have been if Bass Reeves had failed. More than there would have been if he'd confirmed the prejudiced assumptions about black incapability. His success opened doors. Not wide, not easily, but measurably, provably. Because organizations that had worked with Bass Reeves and seen his effectiveness were more willing to hire other black lawmen. Judges who'd trusted Bass's testimony were more willing to trust other black officers. Communities that Bass had protected were more willing to accept black authority. It's a small thing in some ways, a few more opportunities, a slightly better chance. But for the individuals who benefited, it was everything. It was the difference between having a career in law enforcement and being denied it, between proving their own capabilities and never getting the chance. And the ripples extended further. Bass Reeves' existence, his success, his undeniable competence, they all contributed to a slow shift in perception. Not a dramatic change, not a revolution, but a gradual, grudging acknowledgement that maybe, possibly, black people were capable of roles beyond servitude and manual labor. Every white person who worked with Bass and came away respecting him. Every criminal who expected an easy target because of his race and instead found the most formidable lawman they'd ever encountered. Every judge who relied on his testimony. Every community he protected. They all had their assumptions challenged, their prejudices confronted with contradictory evidence. Most of them probably didn't change their overall views about race. Racism is resilient. People are capable of holding contradictory beliefs, of making exceptions that don't alter their general prejudices. Bass Reeves is good, but he's different from other black people, is a thought many of his white contemporaries probably had. But even that was progress. Even grudging acknowledgement that one black man could be exceptional was better than complete denial. And every exception, every acknowledgement, every moment of forced respect, it all contributed to a slow erosion of the idea that black people were inherently inferior. Bass Reeves didn't end racism, didn't transform American society, wasn't trying to. He was just doing his job. But in doing that job with excellence for 34 years, he changed minds, challenged assumptions, proved possibilities, made the future slightly more open than the past had been. That's how change often happens. Not through dramatic revolutionary moments, though those matter too, but through quiet, persistent excellence that accumulates until it becomes undeniable. Through individuals who prove through their work what words alone could never demonstrate. And Bass Reeves' influence extended beyond race. His story speaks to anyone who's ever been underestimated. Anyone who's been told they can't do something because of their background or circumstances. Anyone who's faced prejudice or discrimination or doubt. Because the core message of his life is universal. You are not defined by what others think of you. You're defined by what you do, by the choices you make, by the integrity you maintain, by the excellence you demonstrate. Society tried to define Bass Reeves as property, as inferior, as incapable, and he rejected that definition. Not through anger or rebellion or violence, though he'd earned the right to all of those, but through simply being excellent, through doing work so good that the false definitions couldn't hold. That's a message anyone can use. You don't have to accept the limitations others try to place on you. You don't have to internalize the prejudices society projects onto you. You can choose to define yourself through your actions, through your character, through your work. It won't be easy, It wasn't easy for Bass Reeves. The costs are real. The sacrifices are significant. The burden of having to be exceptional just to be considered equal is unjust. But it's also possible. Bass proved it's possible. And in our current era, his story resonates in specific ways. We're still grappling with questions about law enforcement, about who gets to have authority and how that authority should be used, about the relationship between police and communities, about justice and fairness and accountability. Bass Reeves stands as an example of what law enforcement can be at its best. Fair, incorruptible, focused on actual justice rather than power or control, willing to apply the law equally to everyone, even family members, treating even criminals with a baseline level of dignity and humanity. He wasn't perfect, made mistakes, had flaws, but his overall record demonstrates that it's possible to be a lawman and maintain your integrity, to have power and not abuse it, to enforce laws fairly in a society built on unfairness. And that matters, because we need models of what good policing looks like. We need examples that demonstrate it's possible. We need proof that the problems we see in modern law enforcement aren't inevitable, that corruption and abuse aren't necessary features of the job, that there's a better way. Bass Reeves is that proof. His 34-year career with zero substantiated complaints of corruption or abuse. His practice of giving criminals chances to surrender. His fairness in dealing with everyone from tribal leaders to outlaws. His willingness to arrest his own son rather than compromise his principles. All of it demonstrates what's possible when a lawman genuinely cares about justice. Not that every cop could be Bass Reeves. He was exceptional. But exceptional doesn't mean impossible. It means difficult. It means requiring dedication and sacrifice, an unwavering commitment to principles. And if we expect less than that from law enforcement, if we accept corruption and abuse as inevitable, we're doing a disservice to the communities police are supposed to serve. Bass Reeves shows us what we should be aiming for, what standards we should hold law enforcement to, what's possible when someone truly commits to justice rather than just power. But beyond the specific lessons about law enforcement, Bass Reeves' story is fundamentally about human potential, about what becomes possible when someone refuses to be limited by circumstances, when someone chooses excellence despite every obstacle, when someone maintains integrity even when corruption would be easier. He was born into slavery, the ultimate denial of human agency and potential. A system designed to crush spirit and capability, to reduce people to property, to deny them any possibility of greatness. And from that beginning, he became legendary. Not through luck, not through being in the right place at the right time, through work, through skill, through character, through 34 years of choosing to be better than circumstances suggested he could be. That's the ultimate refutation of any system that claims to judge human worth by race or origin or circumstances of birth. Because if a man born into slavery can become the greatest lawman of his era, what excuse does anyone else have for claiming inherent superiority based on skin color? Bass Reeves' very existence was an argument, not one he made verbally, one he lived. And that lived argument was more powerful than any speech or essay or manifesto could have been. He didn't theorize about equality. He demonstrated it. Didn't claim black people were as capable as white people. Proved it. Didn't argue that justice could be colorblind. Showed what that looked like in practice. And that demonstration, that proof, that showing, it all matters. Because it can't be dismissed as theoretical or ideological. It's historical fact. Documented, verified, undeniable. Bass Reeves existed, his arrests are recorded, his service is documented, his excellence is proven. And that proof stands for all time. A permanent rebuttal to racism, a lasting demonstration of human potential, an eternal example of what becomes possible when character is allowed to exceed circumstance. This is why telling his story matters. Why remembering him matters. Why fighting against the erasure and appropriation of his legacy matters. Because his life proves something important. Something that every generation needs to remember. Something that challenges the lies every era tells about who can achieve what. Bass Reeves was a hero. Not the Hollywood kind, with dramatic poses and inspiring speeches. The real kind. The kind who showed up every day and did difficult work with integrity. Who maintained principles under pressure. Who served others at great personal cost. Who made the world slightly better through decades of persistent excellence. And he did it all while wearing a badge that many said he had no right to carry. While facing prejudice that would have broken lesser men. While carrying burdens that no one should have to bear. While being denied recognition that lesser white lawmen received freely. He did it anyway, because the work mattered, because justice needed serving, because someone had to stand up and prove that a former slave could command respect through excellence. And Bass Reeves chose to be that someone. His story is a gift to us, a reminder of what's possible, a challenge to our assumptions, a call to maintain integrity even when it's difficult, an example of how one person's excellence can change perceptions and open doors for others. We should honor that gift, tell his story, share it widely, make sure future generations know about the man who was born into slavery and became a legend, who faced every obstacle and overcame them all through skill and character, who proved that respect has nothing to do with circumstances of birth and everything to do with content of character. And we should apply his lessons. When we face doubt, remember Bass Reeves and do the work that proves doubters wrong. When we're tempted to compromise our integrity, remember Bass Reeves and choose principles over convenience. When we wonder if one person can make a difference, remember Bass Reeves and understand that consistent excellence over time changes worlds. His legacy is in our hands now. Whether we remember him or forget him, whether we learn from his example or ignore it, whether we let his story inspire us to our own excellence or let it fade back into obscurity. Choose remembrance. Choose learning. Choose inspiration. Because Bass Reeves earned that. Earned it through 34 years of service that cost him almost everything, but proved something eternal. They said no former slave could command respect. Bass Reeves proved them wrong. Not through words, through deeds, through decades of being undeniably, consistently, remarkably excellent. Through becoming so good at what he did that even his enemies had to acknowledge it. Through building a reputation so powerful, it's still growing more than a century after his death. He commanded respect because he earned it. Through every arrest, every fair dealing, every principle maintained, every sacrifice made, every day of showing up and doing the hard work of justice. And that respect, that legend, that legacy, it belongs to all of us now. A reminder that excellence transcends circumstance, that character matters more than color, that integrity is the ultimate power, that one person, regardless of where they start, can change history through persistent, principled action. Bass Reeves, born a slave, died a legend, lived a life that proved respect isn't given based on birth. It's earned through character. And once truly earned, it echoes forever. If this story moved you, if the life of Bass Reeves reminded you that greatness can come from anywhere, and that one person's persistent excellence can change the world, then share it. Make sure others know about him. Make sure his story isn't forgotten again. Make sure the children growing up today, especially those who face their own doubters and barriers, know about the man who proved that circumstances of birth don't determine limits of achievement. Tell them about Bass Reeves, the greatest lawman the American frontier ever produced, the man who wore a badge when others said he had no right to it, who commanded respect when others said it was impossible, who maintained integrity when corruption would have been easier, who served justice when he could have chosen vengeance. Tell them that excellence knows no color, that character transcends circumstance, that persistence defeats prejudice, that one person really can make a difference, and that proof of all these truths can be found in the documented, verified, undeniable life of Bass Reeves. His story is our inheritance, a gift from the past, a challenge for the present, a promise for the future. The promise that we are not limited by what others think of us, that we can exceed expectations through work and character, that justice is possible when people commit to it with integrity. And if you want to hear more stories like this, stories of people who changed history despite everything stacked against them, people who proved that courage, integrity, and determination can overcome any obstacle, people whose excellence challenged prejudice and opened doors for others, make sure to subscribe, because history is full of heroes who've been forgotten, stories that were buried by prejudice or lost to time, people like Bass Reeves who deserve to be remembered, whose examples can inspire us, whose lessons can guide us, whose lives prove what's possible when character meets opportunity. Bass Reeves wrote his last trail in 1909. He died in 1910. But his legend lives on, carried forward by everyone who believes that doing the right thing matters, that integrity is non-negotiable, that justice should be equal, that excellence is the ultimate answer to prejudice, and that one person, through persistent, principled action, really can change the world. The badge he wore is in a museum now, but the principles he lived by, the standard he set, the proof he provided, those are eternal, available to anyone willing to learn from his example, to anyone ready to choose excellence over excuses, to anyone committed to maintaining integrity even when it's difficult. Bass Reeves proved something that every generation needs to remember. Greatness isn't about where you start. It's about how you choose to live, the work you do, the integrity you maintain, the service you provide, the difference you make. He made a difference, an enormous, lasting, undeniable difference. Changed perceptions, opened doors, proved possibilities, saved lives, brought justice to a lawless territory, showed that a former slave could command more respect than men born into privilege. That excellence transcends every artificial barrier society tries to erect. And his message to us, across the gulf of more than a century, is simple but profound. You can do it too. Whatever obstacles you face, whatever doubters surround you, whatever circumstances try to limit you, you can exceed them through work, through character, through persistent, principled excellence. Not easily. Bass Reeves didn't do it easily. The costs were real. The sacrifices were enormous. The burden was crushing at times. But he did it. And in doing it, he proved it was possible. That's his final gift to us. The proof that it's possible. The example of how it's done. The inspiration to try. Honor that gift. Remember his story. Learn from his example. Apply his lessons. And maybe, just maybe, become your own kind of legend. Not by being Bass Reeves. You can't be. He was unique. But by being the best version of yourself. By maintaining your integrity. By doing your work with excellence. By choosing principle over convenience. That's how Bass Reeves would want to be honored. Not through statues or memorials, though those have their place, but through people living with integrity, working with excellence, choosing duty over comfort, maintaining principles under pressure. Be that person in your own context, your own time, your own way. And when you face doubt or prejudice or obstacles that seem insurmountable, remember the man born into slavery who became the most feared and respected lawman in America. Remember Bass Reeves, and be excellent anyway.